A long time ago, on a comics page far, far away.
Welcome to Panel Up, your monthly pop culture panel. I'm John Campbell.
And I am Mike Gergoni.
Oh, Gergoni, it's the dog days of summer, as they say.
And who did let those dogs out? Did we ever answer that question, John?
You know, it's still, I think, one of history's great unsolved mysteries.
Yeah, it's right up there with how Archimedes survived the invasion of Syracuse, but we'll get to that.
We may have some answers to that, and it might involve a certain archaeologist. Yes, we're taking our break from the 1970s to catch up on what's happening in pop culture now, as we do once a month here.
In the 1960s?
Yeah, it's both forward and backward for us, which is kind of what this movie is.
Yeah.
We're gonna have our review of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. But first, let's talk about some things right now that what's got you excited, Gergoni? As always, we start with here. What's.
Yeah, let's a state of the pop culture, right? And that's kind of the issue this week, right? Is we're in the middle of summer. There's a lot of stuff being announced, and there's a lot of stuff being leaked. There's a lot of stuff being shown off as just like, hey, this stuff's around the corner. And on top of all of that, we have a possible Actors Guild strike happening as we record.
As we're recording this, it's looking imminent. We're probably in an actors' strike as you're watching or listening to this. So,
for all we know, all of the stuff we're about to talk about in terms of what we're excited for is about to come to a screeching halt.
yeah, it's a weird time. It's and the thing about it, I was thinking about this is we went through the COVID shutdowns of all the movies and TV and stuff like that. We're now just getting to. I'm never expecting more than like a year or two of film and television at this point.
And it really does feel like at this point we're only just now sort of recovering from the big hiccup that COVID caused, right?
Yeah.
We're still getting releases from stuff that was delayed because of COVID.
Absolutely. I mean, the movie we're talking about this week was supposed to come out last year. Mm-hmm. A bunch of everything. We're still on kind of what's supposed to be last year's blockbusters, and now we may not have next year's blockbusters. So it's a whole thing. Every TV show is on pause. So whatever's airing now is stuff that was already done.
Mm-hmm. And we have some stuff in the can, because, like, talking about stuff we're excited for, the day we record this, so yesterday, if you're listening to it the day it's released, we got a bevy of new trailers that have piqued my interest, certainly. Another Lucasfilm franchise, it's a little thing, you might have heard of it, called Star Wars, released a trailer for the new Ahsoka show coming to Disney+. And maybe I've watched it a dozen times already, because it really does look like this is just going to be Star Wars Rebels Season 5, and I couldn't be happier about that.
It's going to be interesting to see what it's like, because I think one of the things we've talked about that has worked so well about those the Star Wars live-action TV shows is their ability to appeal to both audiences who are obsessed with continuing these things from the animated and people who are just like, well, I just like them Star Wars pictures.
Sure. People who don't maybe even consider the animated properties like something they'd even consider watching, which, again, I see as a really narrow view of the property as a whole. But maybe if you're not as a big a fan, like if you don't seek out other bits of the property, and that's fine. You can enjoy Star Wars however you want. But the idea that you dismiss a Star Wars thing just because it's an animated show has always frustrated me to no end.
Sure, yeah, especially if the whole thing is just like we just want quality storytelling, whatever format that takes on. But I think the thing that has been so great about what both Favreau and Filoni and the other people who work on those shows have done is they really do work for both things, and so I'm excited. I think all of a sudden. And I think ideally then maybe that will drive more people to go look at those animated shows.
I would hope so, and especially this. Like I said, based on this trailer, it really does look like we're just picking up straight from the end of the fourth season of Rebels. That show ends with one of the main characters and Grand Admiral Thrawn getting like jettisoned out into deep space somewhere in the unknown territories of the unknown regions of the Star Wars galaxy, and two of our characters, primarily Ahsoka Tano and Sabine Wren, who is the Mandalorian we see in this trailer, going off to go look for this other character, Ezra Bridger, who is also seen in this trailer as a recording.
Yes, and I think that, that also fits, that makes sense based on where we left Ahsoka in The Mandalorian, where we met back up with her. It was very clear that was continuing forward, and I can't wait to see this. I mean, it looks great. We haven't really had, Mandalorian has had aspects of this, and certainly Obi-Wan, but, real heavy Jedi Sith kind of battles and, lightsaber duels and things like that. So I'm excited to see what that looks like on a weekly basis.
Yeah, no, and obviously there's the kind of sad note to it, as this is going to be probably one of the last things we see Ray Stevenson acting in, because he passed away recently. So him being one of the primary antagonists of this show is going to have a bittersweet kind of sense to it, and seeing him get to like flex a little bit with his bad guy muscles in this trailer was just like, oh, that looks great, but oh, now I'm sad.
Ray Stevenson was a great actor, man, and a very underrated Punisher, in my opinion, as well. I really love Punisher Warzone. So, but man, I mean, the thing about when people kind of yell about when are we going to get a new Star Wars movie, I'm all on board to see a new Star Wars movie, but I'm not at a loss for quality Star Wars content by any stretch of the imagination. So, yeah. That's kind of,
David Tennant returning as the lightsaber building droid who appeared in Clone Wars, which I'm very excited about.
Anything that has more David Tennant in it is always a good thing.
It's always kind of prickly when you recast people who you have a definitive voice for in your head from a cartoon into live action. And like, obviously Ahsoka was the first step with that, as Rosario Dawson kind of creating this character as a live action persona, as opposed to Ashley Eckstein's performance as Ahsoka in all of the animated shows. But doing that for basically the entire cast of Rebels, I'm very curious to see. I think a lot of these casting choices look really good. Natasha Liu Bordizio as Sabine looks great. I think Mary Elizabeth Winstead, I'm not totally sold on her Hera yet, but I know she's a great actor, and so I'm ready to roll into the show and learn to love her take on Hera.
Well, yeah, it's it is always that translation, and I think your Katie Sackhoffs of the world are the rare exception. I do think there's sort of a thing where people get very upset that it's not always that, but it's like, well, that's pretty unusual that would happen. So
yeah, I would really, really love it if we got what's his name back as Kanan, though.
Freddie Prinze Jr.
Freddie Prinze Jr. I mean, spoilers for a show that ended 5 years ago, but his character's dead at the end of that show. But it's Star Wars. He was a Jedi. Force ghosts are a thing.
We are getting Lars Mikkelsen back, though, as Grand Admiral Thrawn in live action.
That's the biggie, though, right? Is because we're getting Thrawn as a live action character for the first time ever, and Thrawn is such a singular point in certain Star Wars fandoms. We talk about on the May the Panel Be With You show so much about how the comic books especially, but the novels as well, was all people had for the longest time. In that period in the 90s, before the prequels came out, when Heir to the Empire was the accepted sequel to Return of the Jedi. And so Thrawn was the heir to the Empire, as it were.
Totally. And I mean, boy, the Mikkelsen boys are just taking over Hollywood as the bad guys, aren't they? Because we're going to be talking about his brother Mads in just a little bit here.
We can never have them both on screen because it's just too many Mikkelsens.
It's too much. It's too much Mikkelsen. So that looks good. Uh, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about a photo that Ryan Reynolds posted on his Instagram.
Yes. We, despite the fact that the production for this film is probably about to grind to a halt, like we said,
it's probably already shut down once again as you're hearing this. So
we did get some production photos from the set of Deadpool 3, in which we got to see both Ryan Reynolds, the man himself, back as Deadpool in full costume, but more excitingly, we saw some yellow and blue spandex covering the rippling torso of one Hugh Jackman as Wolverine.
Dude, I saw I had this thought, and then I saw one of my favorite podcasting comedians, Paul Scheer, is a huge nerd, talking about it. He goes, "We've waited 23 years for this."
And people like picking apart the details in the suit, like between the shoulder pads and like just the color orientation looking perfect, and the fucking knuckle sheaths on his gloves, the little metal bits where the claws come out.
As it should be. Yeah, it does feel... And this was something I do remember. It was kind of like when they said he was going to come and do Deadpool in the MCU, I think a lot of people were like, well, wait, will they do the costume? Like, because MCU would do the cut. Like, Fox really steered away from it. But you're like, MCU has really embraced the look of these characters. And it is things like, it's the same thing when we saw Professor X in Multiverse of Madness, and he looked like the animated series Professor X in his gold chair that he was sort of like inside of. They are giving us the aesthetics of these characters in a way that was, I mean, literally, I remember them talking about when they did the 2000s movie. They're like, oh, we did a camera test of Hugh in a yellow uniform, and it just looked stupid. And maybe it did, that version they made. But it's just this sort of idea about like that. No, they just can't. It would never be. That's silly.
Well, it was this rejection of the source material in a way for a lot of those early 2000s films. I think Spider-Man even did this to an extent when you look at the design of Green Goblin and how they changed that character up. And a rejection of the more quote-unquote goofy elements of comic books, and having a colorful team has, like, on paper, that is silly sounding.
Well, and I think you know, I don't blame those filmmakers. I don't even look at those as a negative. It's like, yeah, we kind of had to walk before, you know, we had to kind of crawl before we walked, right? Like, the thing about it is, like, I don't know, maybe at that time, and I even remember thinking that, I'm like, well, this makes sense. Like, that 2000s costumes where they're all in black with sort of some color accents. You know, because it is kind of like, all right, let's spoon feed this to an audience that isn't used to it. Everybody's got crazy powers, but they've got sort of these cool 2000s uniforms. And then we've just slowly been kind of peeling back the layers of the movie versions and becoming and embracing the you know, you've sort of seen this natural evolution of these movies to the point where you and I were just talking about Blue Beetle coming out. That costume is so comics accurate.
Yeah, and based on the trailer, we've seen, like, we're going to be showing off some Ted Kord stuff too, and that's even sillier.
That's what so there does seem to be it's like it's just like they keep pushing it out a little bit more, going like, will a general audience handle this? Can they handle this, that, and then eventually, and now I feel like, of course, I mean, you know, there was the deleted alternate ending of the Wolverine where he opened up the case that had a version of the costume in it. So, you know, they've been sort of, I feel like there's been the last couple Wolverine appearances have been like, could we put him in the costume? I feel like maybe now we could put him in the costume.
And I'm going to be totally honest, I think Deadpool specifically, like, spearheaded this in a big way.
Yeah.
When they just totally embraced the head-to-toe Merc with a Mouth look in that first movie and didn't shy away from it at all.
And in fact, you know, to the point of doing they were the first to do the eyes that changed like a comic book drawing, and then, of course, the Spider-Man design took that further. So it does feel like, yes, Deadpool definitely is a huge milestone in comic book filmmaking in terms of just embracing the aesthetics of a character. Now, I will say, I love, because this is just comic book fans, right? So many people going, I'm so happy, I can't wait, I've always wanted to see this. And then it wasn't 10 minutes before I saw a guy going, he didn't have sleeves in the comics. Like, oh, of course. Immediately, everybody's going, I can't believe it. This is so great. All of our dreams. Then one guy just going like, this small detail is wrong.
I mean, look, if I'm not going to say it was my first thought, but it was definitely in the first, like, 3 thoughts of just like, okay, but how does the mask look?
Well, sure, there's that. And I think that's a fairer question than why does he have sleeves?
Also, my reaction to that complaint is just like, look, we've got room to go battle damaged. That's what they're giving us here.
There you go. Yeah.
We've got sleeves that we can then tear off mid-fight. That's what we are going to get.
That would be very cool. But I will say the actual biggest shock to me is the announcement that Jennifer Garner is returning as Elektra in this movie. That's okay. The costume, I kind of thought maybe. I'm so glad. I'm filled with joy that that's happening. But the biggest thing is like, what?
It's not going to be more than a scene, right?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I don't know. I think based on I don't want to spoil this movie too much for myself because there's been a lot of leaks about what this movie is going to be and how it's going to fit in with everything.
I think one of the reasons that like Ryan Reynolds just posted this photo is to get ahead of any leaks of this, right?
Sure. But it's kind of inevitable when you live in an internet age where like you're trying to tap yourself into certain aspects of this culture. Avoiding spoilers becomes very difficult at times, especially on certain communities on Reddit and on Twitter. And so I've had some stuff like people using I don't want to say like leaks or whatever, but like there's definitely like some thoughts about what is going on in this film floating around the internet, and the idea that we might see a Jennifer Garner Elektra or a Ben Affleck as Daredevil. Or
I've also heard that. Yeah.
Or any number of
I've heard of
characters
Chris Evans
from the
as
Fox
Human Torch. Yeah, I mean,
Marvel stuff.
I've heard a lot of stuff. Who knows? You know, what that's gonna be in what capacity? I don't know. I mean, that's the thing that's fun about. The other thing is the Deadpool movies can do that, right? I mean, they
Totally.
the tone of it can function within that. They can comment on superhero continuity logic issues. I mean, literally, you know, Deadpool goes back in time and shoots Ryan Reynolds before he can make Green Lantern in the second movie, right? Like,
no. The thought being that this movie is going to somehow address the Disney acquisition of Fox Entertainment and the death of the Fox Marvel universe, quote unquote,
right,
is one that has been floating around for a while, and one that is like kind of cemented by some of the set photos that have leaked out in the last day or two. Specifically, there's the ones that Ryan Reynolds released on his Instagram, but there are others that have also come out surrounding that similar wherever it is they're filming, that leads some people to believe that like we're going to directly be addressing the idea that Fox basically had its own Marvel universe and kind of failed utterly to capitalize on that.
They really did. I mean, that's it exactly. Like it's so interesting. Fox kind of accidentally did and didn't fully embrace what Sony is trying so fucking hard to do.
Right. Because imagine a world in which Fox has the X-Men and the Fantastic Four and like Daredevil and a bunch of other associated characters. They could very easily have a superhero universe spun up just by those properties alone.
That would have been a lot more cohesive and made a lot more sense and been a lot more appealing than what Sony has, right? Like,
right.
Trying to turn, because those are like marquee characters, obviously, whereas Sony is trying to turn like side characters into their own franchises. I mean, did we talk about that Kraven the Hunter trailer? Because holy shit.
I think we talked about it in passing and as like jokey, but like, yeah, it looks bad. And
it looks really bad. Like, it looks like a kind of bad we haven't seen from superhero movies in quite a while.
I don't know how we can sink deeper than Morbius, but damn it, they're trying.
No, it really did feel like, oh shit, maybe Morbius wasn't that bad.
Like, after watching the Kraven the Hunter trailer, I was just like, do I need to rewatch Morbius and reevaluate my life and tastes? No, that can't be right.
No, it does start to become like, it's just like, God, we shouldn't have spent all that energy bagging on Morbius. We're going to have nothing in the tank for this. Jesus Christ. Yeah.
You want to know why they called me the Rhino? Ugh.
Oh boy. Oh, I mean that's the thing is like I'm watching that trailer and going, God, I hate all this Craven stuff. And then that happens, I'm going, no, never mind. This is now the part I'm angriest at. Are you kidding me? And the rhino skin turning his skin to rhino hide. Oh, for fuck's sake. Come on, man.
Yeah, but if you get lion blood in your blood, you get lion powers, John.
Oh my God, that like right off the bat, you're like, oh God, no. We probably have to talk about that movie, though. I just feel like,
sure,
at some point, yeah.
I guess
I'm not thrilled about it, but it does feel like it's good. It feels like it'd be irresponsible on our part not to do it.
I feel like you're threatening me with like Clockwork Orange levels of like ultra violence at this point, but
I will say that we'll have to get because we had him on the Morbius one we did. We'll have to get Brendan Jones, who is enraged by good comic book movies sometimes. Brendan Jones is the guy who will bring up the sleeves. I'll just say that. I haven't talked to him about that photo as of yet, but I guarantee you he'll have an issue with those sleeves. And he'll have some problem with there's not enough blue in some part of it or something.
And Hugh Jackman is a foot too tall. We all know these things.
I mean, believe me, that's always comes up because great actor, great in the part, way too tall.
Yeah. I mean, that's totally fair.
But just so yes, lots of ups and downs there in the space of. Though now it really is becoming there is Marvel and then there is real shit Marvel if it's not the Sony Animation Studios, which is kind of even its own thing.
Yeah, I mean, and all they've really got going for them is the Across the Spider-Verse movies at this point. I'd be curious to see them do something else.
Aren't they doing a Spider-Man noir show? Isn't that there's a?
Well, I always thought the TV stuff was at Marvel. That's why they're doing Freshman Year, which is another thing that's been delayed forever. But
oh well, yeah, I mean everything's been delayed forever.
Yeah.
Spider-Man noir. Oh, good lord. Sony is making a Spider-Man noir live-action series
with Nicolas Cage.
No, nothing about that. I don't know. They're also making a Silk TV show. Good lord, stop! Stop.
Silk is another one of those characters that, like, in the absence of a mainline Spider-Man, I don't know what that show looks like.
Correct. That's exactly the thing, right? Where you're just going like, but all of this just feels like, I don't know.
But they did it with Venom, so I don't fucking know anymore.
And all of this just feels real desperate to me. Anyway.
Speaking of desperate, you saw the Wonka trailer?
Oh, good lord. What? Yeah. I mean, other than Hugh Grant as an Oompa Loompa, that's all I need in my life. That's so bizarre. That's just one of those things that's like, I just have to see it for that because in what world? No, the Wonka trailer, well, Wonka in general, like, I keep trying to figure out where's the bridge too far for me. And
I love that, like, the first 2/3 of that sentence was you just like starting a thought, ellipses into I don't know what to say about this. Start another thought, ellipses into I don't know what to say about this.
Well, because there is something about it that's like it's exactly what you think it is. At the same time, it's just like what this is real. Like it feels like a thing. It feels like like an SNL sketch that they'd be like, finally, the origin story of Willy Wonka. And you're like, no, this movie's actually coming out, and the studio spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it.
Yeah, and Timothée Chalamet is there.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta say, too, it's just like, I love Timothée Chalamet, and I think one of the things I really like about him is he is sort of the indie art house darling. So guys like me and you know, all the sort of cinema snobs love him. So it is, and then he goes and does a big studio franchise, and it's Dune. You're like, oh, well, this is like what the art house kind of franchise is. And then it's like, oh, now I'm going to take an even bigger thing, and it's fucking Wonka? Man, I hope the house that's built him is gorgeous. It's just one of those things where, I don't want to assume anyone is making anything with bad intentions, of course. But it just seems like, when these filmmakers and Chalamet are talking about, like, well, we've always wondered about the deep reaches of Willy Wonka, and it's always been a story we've wanted to tell. And just like, I'm sorry, I don't think that's true.
Who's the we in this scenario, and how far back were the checks backdated?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it feels very similar to me to that Robert Downey Jr. Doolittle movie, where it's just like, no, these. It's the thing that the industry has been built on. When the IP stretches too far, where it's just like literally anything anyone might know that might have any, even like 5-person fan base, is on the table now for a blockbuster movie. There's this attitude. People talk about IP, but it's like it goes beyond that. Now it is just like it is always safer in their mind to start with any kind of recognizability. And what that leads to is stuff like, I really could see this going down the Doolittle path, where it's just like absolutely nobody goes, because who could possibly care? Who is it for? Who are the I love the original Gene Wilder movie. I've seen that movie a million. That was like a childhood favorite of mine. I love that movie. It is so weird. It is so of its time. It is such a perfect Gene Wilder role. The Burton movie is not one of my, and I'm a huge Burton fan, but that's real low on my list of Burton films.
I've never seen the Burton film.
I wouldn't say there's any reason. I don't think it's like god awful, but it's just like, okay.
Yeah.
I saw it when it came out.
It was one of those films that when it was coming out, I was like, no, I'm still good with the original. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and that's kind of how I feel about it too. And that's the thing about this, is it just feels like it's a movie for no one. It really is, to me, when I look at a trailer like this, it really does feel like the emptiness of Hollywood, the cynical, just I don't know, man, Wonka. That's a thing that people know.
Didn't you ever want to know like how he made his first chocolate, John?
No. That's it exactly too. The other thing I get tired of, and the bridge too far for me before was the Nurse Ratched show on Netflix, where it's like the origin of the villainous nurse from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Just like, not everybody needs a fucking origin, man. Like, it's just
right. But as opposed to like that is the perfect counter. Well, and that show specifically, I believe, is kind of a reaction to the Hannibal show, right?
Yeah. Yes.
And Hannibal is such a perfect example of something where they took a lot of disparate elements of a very recognizable character and solidified it into the canon as it was sort of presented in the books that character originated from, and in a way that the movies had never like coalesced into a singular ongoing continuity.
Yes. And that was made by a guy who goes, I read these books and I was always like, why aren't they focusing on this aspect of it, this thing? It is carving off a piece. The Hannibal show made so much sense, and it's such a brilliant show. It's one of the most beautifully photographed shows. It's disturbing and awesome.
Speaking of Mickelson's.
Yeah, fucking Mads Mikkelsen's amazing. We'll talk about it. I have more praise to heap on him in a second, but that show really did scream of like, oh yeah, this was always here. If you just kind of blew the dust off of it, Wonka really feels like we're reaching real far, and I feel like the other opposite point to this IP that came out this year that we both love was the Dungeons and Dragons movie, where they really are like getting at a thing, an aesthetic, right? But really made with a passion. It's also interesting Hugh Grant's in that too, but it's sort of like, oh, this is really coming at it from a lore that people love, and then we're gonna build a good movie on top. Like we're gonna put a good movie around the lore people are familiar with.
Well, because what's important about, I think, the D&D movie and like the Hannibal show and these things that coalesce these IPs in a way that, like, obviously their influence is undeniable, but no one's really done the work to consolidate what makes those things special to everybody until the Hannibal show or D&D movie, is this idea that people don't necessarily care about the, like, quote-unquote lore of these things. What they want is a single place that can encapsulate what they love about it in a single place, right? Like, you don't need pieces of it in a Hannibal prequel that nobody asked for, or a
because what look at the exact opposite of that within the same franchise. You remember Hannibal Rising?
That really was exactly what I was talking about. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying. That's what's so interesting is that movie nobody gave a shit because it doesn't really matter. And that was so not what the Hannibal show was. The other thing that I was thinking of that has now just left my brain, which is great for podcasting. What I was gonna say is, go ahead. Yeah.
In the realm of fantasy, on that same turn, is a movie like Monster Hunter, right? Where it's like you're taking this IP that is tangentially like fantasy, like armored warriors fighting monsters, D&D-esque sort of vibe, and then trying to just wring out the money of people who enjoy that IP by slapping the name of it on something that is like vaguely reminiscent, but it's really just an excuse to have Mila Jovovich use a big sword.
Yeah, I mean that's it exactly. Is you still at the end of the day always with these, and it's one of those things that's like, well, of course, but it's not, of course, unfortunately, because we've seen enough examples like Monster Hunter. It's like you still have to make a movie. Like it's no matter what lore is or love of the aesthetics of something might get people through the door. The recognizability doesn't matter if you don't make something that actually impacts people in some way. I think a movie that I know we have different opinions of, but I think you can recognize his weaknesses still, is the Warcraft movie, which to me is so indebted to lore, but really kind of failed to, and we saw this with just a general audience, to make people like me, who was game to watch a Warcraft movie and get invested. But I just kept going, I don't care about it. They didn't tell me the human story. It doesn't have to actually be about humans. And don't come at me, World of Warcraft.
The person story.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Is like, and that's just true about genre fiction in general. Ultimately, everything has to be about people. You can't. All the world building has to lift up the characters, right? It always has to be about. Otherwise, it leads to things where I just go like, "Oh, that was cool."
Right. No, and I think one of the larger weaknesses of the Warcraft movie is it sacrifices. I mean, I think it's too long, first off, and B, it like moves focus away from a very human story in the form or for the sake of
it really
dumping recognizable lore bits into the movie for people who were engaged with the game and not just coming to it for this movie.
It was no one's story was kind of my problem with it, right? Yeah. Like, it just sort of is like, man, this is really giving me this giant world, but the problem is they introduce like 20 main characters in the first couple minutes of the movie, and so I just go, wait, what is my grounding? It forces me to look at things on a macro level, and that's just hard to engage with.
Yeah, no, exactly. Is engagement with IP a segue into Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny? I don't mean to like skip over what you've been excited about in pop culture.
Oh no. I mean, look, I got to see Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 last night, and it's fucking amazing. And you know there's going to be an episode down the line on our Punch Up Goes to the Movies where I can talk about that forever and why I believe Ethan Hunt to be a deity of destiny, and you know, whatever. It's a whole thing. He's the living manifestation of destiny, as they said in Rogue Nation. And that movie further adds to my Church of Hunt. It's incredible. Go see it. See it on the biggest screen you can, as loud as you can. It is exactly the reason I go to the movies. All right, let's roll it back even more now as we talk about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, which is our main thing. Because let's roll it back to if Mission Impossible is exactly why I go to the movies. Indiana Jones, and I'm sure this is the case for you, was so formative in everything I like in cinema. That like these movies were so, because we grew up in an era where they much like Star Wars, they already just existed.
Right. I don't have as deep of a connection to the Indiana Jones franchise as I think you do. I loved it.
Few people do.
Sure. And like I think it did inform on my sensibilities, but that was because I came to it after I had a very strange introduction to like just the course of storytelling in a modern context, because I was introduced to a lot of like turn of the century pop like pulp fiction at a very young age. So I was reading Edgar Rice Burroughs before I'd even seen any of the Indiana Jones movies.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So I mean, so that you're talking about the sort of building blocks that became this, and Star Wars, and a lot of
Sure.
the stuff that was the pop culture of our youth, like the origins of the true origins of that.
Sure, but what I'm getting at is like Indiana Jones and Star Wars as well owe so much to the pulp adventures of like old movie serials, right?
Yeah.
So when I was first introduced to the movies of Indiana Jones, I believe I saw Temple of Doom first.
Fascinating.
But
You're not the first person I've heard say that.
no, I think Temple of Doom is probably the most disposable of the original three and was on cable the most.
Yes. And a hot take, get ready to it's my least favorite of the whole franchise.
The whole franchise. Wow.
I rank
Okay.
it fifth. I do not like Well, I like Temple of Doom because look, I put myself in the same position as fellow podcaster Matt Gorley is. I'm compromised because everything already starts out at great just because Harrison Ford put on a fedora.
Sure.
But yes, Temple of Doom I feel like is objectively the weakest movie. Whatever things but like I feel like the middle section of Temple, we're not here to litigate Temple of Doom, but I'll just say,
Sure.
I know there are those people who adore that movie, and I feel like it's the one that feels the least like an Indiana Jones adventure to me.
I think because it was the first one I engaged with, I hold it in a higher regard, and
I think that is for a lot of people who love that movie is true.
I think I remember bits and pieces of it, and I conflate my love of that movie with love of movies like Goonies. Obviously, there are some key connections there, but
Just anything with Ke Huy Quan.
yeah, pretty much. But this franchise to me has always stood as just like the mirror of Star Wars in a way, or the shadow of Star Wars in a way, because it's the other quote unquote Lucasfilm franchise, because nobody really remembers Willow.
We do, damn it.
I know.
We do.
At the end of this movie, the person I saw it with was just like, "Oh, this was a Lucasfilm. This was a Star Wars movie," and I was like, "It's one of three." And they're like, "What's the third one?" And it's like, nobody knows about Willow. It's fine.
I mean, and literally, thanks to the good folks at Disney Plus, you can't.
Yeah. But yeah,
like
so
that Willow show, by
I
the way.
always saw this as like the less engaging, for me, Lucasfilm property, because it didn't have space magic, right?
It has plenty of other magic, though. It's certainly
Sure.
not lacking for magic. And that's the exact opposite for me. I love Star Wars, but Indiana Jones is where my heart lies.
Sure.
The grand adventure of it, the Spielberg of it too, right? There is such a and it's rarer too, especially now, right? There are only 5 of these movies, and they have come out sporadically. Especially between 3 to 4 and 4 to 5, there's been a lot of time between these. So, the Indiana Jones movies are more special to me because the Star Wars movies were always built as this sort of saga, and it's just like, but these precious few Indiana Jones adventures I get, and I think also there is something about it being the lesser loved child of the Lucasfilm that really forced me. Not only did I love it so much, but it really made me go like, well, no, why isn't there more Indiana Jones toys? Which, by the way, regardless of whatever anyone thinks of this movie, the fact that has gotten me so many Indiana Jones toys as a result of this, I've bought so many Indiana Jones figures in the past couple months because this movie, not only are there toys from this movie, but it's opened up like a whole market of pops, statues, action figures, shirts from the other movies. So I actually all the toys. I don't think I've actually bought any Dial of Destiny toys as of yet. So I may have a hot toy on pre-order, but
I was going to say this movie is probably going to have at least like 3 hot toys of Indy alone.
Yeah. I already have a hot toy of him on pre-order, and there's a Mezco figure of him too.
Of course.
Yeah. So, yeah, and I'm just all in because I've been making up for lost time. So if you come over to my apartment now, all around my television is just tons of Indiana Jones toys. In fact, there's one that just came here this morning that I have to go pick up the package for. So, so yes. That being said, Indiana Jones is like is pretty high on my like movie franchises and I've read all the books because it is possible to read all the novels because once again they're not as ubiquitous as Star Wars. I've read every comic book.
Sure. There's only the 3 video games.
They're gonna make me buy an Xbox, Gorgoni, because you saw that the new video game is gonna be Xbox exclusive. The new
well, we'll see about that. I don't know. There's some ongoing litigation, and this maybe isn't the venue to talk about it, but like
maybe it's
there's
not,
some ongoing litigation between Xbox, Microsoft specifically, and Activision that might bust some stuff wide open in the near future. We'll see.
We'll see, but at least at the moment, I saw that and I went like, "Damn, I'm gonna have to buy a goddamn Xbox now." Because I just love this character and his world. I also, yeah, I mean, you know me well enough to know, like, old-timiness is also a big part of my personality. And, yeah, I just love it. Also, he's a nerd. I relate to Indiana Jones in a way. There is something, he's so purely the, like, imagine you're the nerd who spends all the time reading books, but, like, when push comes to shove, you can shoot guys and punch Nazis. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an archaeologist until I found out it didn't involve punching Nazis.
Well, not for like at least 60 years by the time we were born, but
right, yeah. But so that being said, that brings us to the long-awaited. I mean, the thing about Indiana Jones movies too, especially in the time we've been alive, I feel like more often than we get them is rumblings we might get one.
Right, and like obviously the first stone in that avalanche was Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was long gestating.
Yeah, because it took 19 years. Yeah, 19 years
something
to
like
get.
that, yeah.
It was 89 to 2008. And in that time, there were so many starts and stops. And I've read the scripts, the abandoned scripts. You can find them online for the ones that, like, the one that almost happened in 95, the one that almost happened in 2000. And it's interesting to see. But so what we got was 2008's Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which I think is an interesting example of a movie where when it came out, it got pretty good reviews and it made a ton of money, and yet everybody hated it in a weird. It's got a weird place in pop culture to me.
I think it fits squarely in the same place as the Star Wars prequels in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Because I think now, as we have gotten some distance from it, you've got people coming back full circle again to become defenders of the film.
Yeah, and at the time, I've always liked it, generally liked it. I don't think it's as good as some of the other ones. I just stated I like it more than Temple of Doom, which I'm sure, like I said, we'll get a flood of angry comments below.
That sounds blasphemous in my mind, but
but I mean, what's your stance on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull?
I think, and I've only rewatched it a couple of times since we saw it in theaters. I believe we saw it together, didn't we?
I'm sure we did. Yeah.
But
and I think I might have seen it more than once, so I at least went once with you. Yeah.
I see that film as, again, I think I fit it in a very similar box in my head as the prequels, the Star Wars prequels.
Yeah.
Insofar as, like, I think there are a lot of good ideas on paper here. I don't think they're executed particularly well in a lot of cases.
I don't disagree with that at all. No, I think that's true, and I think also being somebody like me who has followed these, like the making of these, and I just rewatched it before. I rewatched all of them as if I needed to, but like they're also now out in 4K.
So do you need an excuse? Yeah.
I will say I'm such a nerd that I do like the new color grading on King of the Crystal Skull. They recolored it for the 4K release. It's subtle, but it does look better. But the thing about it I was gonna say is like I can see watching it where I'm like, okay, I know what Lucas wanted and I know what Spielberg wanted, and I recognize a lot of the flaws in that movie are the clashes between the two.
Yeah. Well, and it's this weird period in both of their careers, right?
Yeah.
It's such a strange crossroads of, and especially Lucas, not being able to give up control of a thing when he is losing control of so many of the other things in his career. and Spielberg, who is sort of coming off of a rough patch, because isn't that like right after or before BFG?
It's right before. I think that it's the 20. That I highly recommend. There's a really good podcast called 21st Century Spielberg, where a guy just looks at his movies post 2000. And I'm generally a defender of 21st Century Spielberg. I think, but all of a sudden that's when, and I think the rise of the internet was a big part of this. And Crystal Skull is, a huge microcosm of this whole effect on his career. Though there became a lot of before 2000, he was basically untouchable.
Yeah,
he was just like, he is the greatest American filmmaker.
That's how he can start a new studio in DreamWorks, right? Like that just wasn't done at the time.
And that's about the time he's doing that, right? Like the first DreamWorks movie he does is Private Ryan.
Yeah, exactly.
So so there's also sort of a thing about like when Spielberg became more than filmmaker, and then at that point, then people start to go like, "Well, is he really that good a director?" So I do think there's a lot of second guessing of Spielberg in the era that he makes Crystal Skull.
Sure, because you have this whole new generation of filmmakers coming up, and people like really trying to figure out what makes cinema and movies good in an era in which how we distribute these things is radically changing, and that whole ecosystem still hasn't, like, we're living in the time period in which like how movies are digested and how media is consumed is changing so rapidly, and how it's discussed is so radically different than it was when he was first starting out.
It's a big reason why these strikes are happening is we have to put things in place to figure out what are we doing in today's modern world with this stuff, and how are people compensated for it. But I also think there's as with any sort of new generation of stuff, there is a rejection of the previous generation, right? So the new generation of filmmakers has to come up going, Spielberg, he wasn't that good,
Jaws, I think more like Yaws.
What I will say is interesting is now, as we come out the other end of that and find ourselves where we are now, I feel like as that goes, there's the rejection before the like. Now Spielberg is just one of the masters. With stuff like West Side Story and The Fabelmans, it is just like, oh right.
I think this movie in particular, Dial of Destiny, is such an attempt to. I think pastiche is the wrong word, but it's getting at what I think. The feeling I get watching this movie is that James Mangold as a filmmaker is someone I love. Talk about Wolverine.
James Mangold's one of my favorite filmmakers, no question.
But this movie doesn't feel necessarily like his. It feels like James Mangold's trying to do a Spielberg.
Sure. Because he's the first filmmaker who isn't Steven Spielberg to make an Indiana Jones movie.
Right.
Like, it would be impossible not to, right? Like, it would just be because Indiana Jones is a weird franchise in that sense, right? Because it is not tour-driven franchise. One guy has made it, ever. And two guys if you count Lucas, although, like, in the day-to-day, there definitely is a difference. Like, you can feel the Spielberg influence, like just the way it looks,
sure.
Right?
Yeah.
So there is that sort of weird thing, and immediately, of course, as soon as Spielberg said he wasn't going to direct this, people were just like, "Oh, well, then forget it."
Right, and honestly, like, there was certainly that thought crossed my mind when that was announced, because then it becomes a little bit more craven, a little bit more like. We were talking about, like, trying to squeeze something out of a franchise that maybe we shouldn't, maybe isn't there, and, like, trying to wring out a little bit of IP recognition just for the sake of that, not for the sake of telling a good story.
Right. And we should say Spielberg maintained his role as a producer, and from what Mangold said, like, was looking at every shot and giving constant notes, and, like, there's still a lot of heavy Spielberg involvement in this movie. From what I gather, very minor involvement from George Lucas. Not none, but I think
no offense to George Lucas, but he feels pretty checked out at this point. Like he
really does.
He got his Disney money and he took a step back, and like he's doing whatever he does on a daily basis, and it doesn't have to be charting the course of a media empire anymore. And he's probably happier for it.
Yeah, from what I gather, the Lucas thing is more like, that sounds good, sure. It's kind of it seems to be this, whereas Spielberg was like making other movies and then at night watching dailies from this movie and going and saying to Mangold, yeah, well, maybe you could do this, or what about that? That's an interesting idea. Like, so there's still a lot of Spielberg involvement in this movie. The other thing that always made me go is like, well, they didn't get a nobody. It's like, okay, if you're not gonna get Spielberg, they did get who I think is one of the best filmmakers out there right now. Of course, not only did Mangold do the Wolverine and Logan, which are just both incredible films, but if people haven't seen Copland, Copland is an incredible movie.
Copland, one of his earlier films, but I always point people to 3:10 to Yuma. I fucking love 3:10 to Yuma.
3:10 to Yuma is one of the best westerns made in the last probably 30 years. That is an amazing movie. Also the movie he did between Logan and this was Ford versus Ferrari, which I thought was a great movie as well. Mangold's a really good filmmaker, and I think in everything I've read, all of his interviews, and he's given a lot of talks about this, because it is the tone of every interview is just like, wow, that must have taken a lot to be able to even think about doing that. And he talked about it because it's a weird twofold, and I think the movie represents this. It has to be so appreciative and romanticized about what came before, while also bringing it into a modern setting, and specifically designing it to be the last Indiana Jones movie, which I know is one of the reasons they went to him, right? Because he had done Logan and had done sort of the sunset of an iconic superhero.
And that's what Indiana Jones is, right? Is like, despite the lack of a complete long-running franchise, he is this superhero in the sense that you see the hat, you see the whip, if you see a boulder rolling down a stone corridor, if you see somebody's face getting melted off, like there are these iconic Indiana Jones things ingrained in pop culture that are just inescapable. The effect those movies had on just media and stories and just everything surrounding it. Like, you've got like kids game shows, you've got other movies doing the same thing, you've got spoofs, you've got reactions, you've got so many video games. I mean, the Uncharted series alone, but like Tomb Raider as well, owes their roots to this like iconic piece of media that only has 5 entries.
It's really interesting. Yeah, it speaks to the power of the iconography and design from the ground up. Spielberg wanted a character who was identified in silhouette, right? Like he wanted to put a stamp on a certain kind of character, and I think that it did because it was never planned to be this rare. I mean, it was just that they couldn't get stuff together. They were always trying to make this. The biggest bummer I have is that there aren't like 5 more of these movies. There should have been, by all reason. It just was for the longest time, it was all 3 of them had to be on board with something.
Yeah.
They all had to sign off on it. And so over the years, there's like the script George Lucas loved, and then there's the script Spielberg loved, but Lucas didn't. And then there's the one Ford didn't like, but they wanted to do this one. And, we were almost had Indiana Jones versus the Saucer Men from Mars. That was a George Lucas project where he really wanted to go. Crystal Skull represents this to a certain extent. He was like, if we move from the 40s to the 50s, then it becomes alien invasion movie. So I want to see Indiana Jones fighting a Martian invasion. And I think Spielberg going like, that's not really the aesthetic
right.
Well, but
you see the through line of that though, right? Because like you think like, okay, 40s adventure films are like Lost Civilizations and a little colonial in terms of how they represent native populations and whatnot, but also fighting Nazis.
Yes, exactly. Those were the pulp heroes at the time. Yeah. And so then he's
in the 50s, when it gets all sci-fi, like you can see the thought progression and how it makes sense, but yes, it doesn't exactly fit the aesthetic of what Indiana Jones had become at that point.
And so what you got, Crystal Skull was essentially the combination of Indiana Jones versus the Saucer Men from Mars, and then Spielberg really was championing the script by Frank Darabont called Indiana Jones and the City of the Gods, which structurally, if you were to read it, reads a lot like Crystal Skull. Like that's the kind of the movie they ended up at least basing the main thing on. It's just then Lucas also kind of got his aliens in there, and the aliens in the movie. This is my issue. I don't have an issue with aliens being in Indiana Jones necessarily, especially because I think like ancient aliens, that kind of stuff, kind of fits the aesthetic, right?
Sure, yeah.
But what happened was Spielberg really doesn't want to do aliens. Lucas really does want to do aliens. And so the aliens in the movie are kind of this like, well, they're aliens, but they're not because George wants them to be, but Steven's like, I'm going to kind of back off on it. That's more my issue with King of the Crystal Skull. It's not that they did aliens, but that they kind of half-heartedly did them.
Yeah. No, you wanted them to go full Stargate, and they just don't.
Yeah, I mean, that, and I would have been fine if that had been the case. Instead, it comes to this like, well, they're beings that travel in the space between spaces. And you're like, well, okay, I don't know what the fuck that means, but that's great. And so that's
some kind of outer space, like aliens?
I do. Well, and then literally when they put their crystal skulls back on and they take off in a big flying saucer, it's like, so they were aliens. And literally he's got John Hurt going, no, what was that, aliens? No, that's not. Yeah. So the third act of Crystal Skull is... Anyway, let's get to Dial of Destiny, because it does feel like, all right, we've done, the Ark of the Covenant, we've done black magic, voodoo. I mean, talk about colonialism. Big thing Temple of Doom does not age well on is they are jamming a lot of cultures into
it is a hodgepodge of other that makes modern audiences very uncomfortable.
There's a reason that India read that script and went, you can't shoot this movie here. We will not let you do this. Then you get back to biblical stuff with of course the Holy Grail, and my favorite still is Last Crusade. I am such
100%.
a Last Crusade devotee. I think to me that is the perfect assemblage of what an Indiana Jones movie should feel like in tone, in aesthetic. Then you get aliens, and so now what's left but time travel?
I mean, I could have seen it. I could have picked out some other stuff. Like I think there's some fun stuff to do in terms of other cultures and other like aesthetics in terms of like ancient magics in that way, and like call it what you want, because in Indiana Jones, like a lot of the magic we see is faith-based, right? It is the idea that you believe in something, it imbues it with enough power to change reality in some way. We see it with the Ark of the Covenant. We see it with even the worshippers of Kali in Temple of Doom, and we see it with the knight in Last Crusade.
Chose poorly.
That theme is not really reflected in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull unless you like really read into John Hurt's character a lot.
Who is underdeveloped is another problem I have with that movie. Even though, no complaints in the moment, because you're watching John Hurt, one of the greatest actors who ever lived, who's doing everything he can, is having a great time. But with this movie, though, what I like about this movie, and I think a little bit why, I guess I should say time travel works well to me for this movie, because Mangold's big theme here is about time. I think the big thing this movie does over Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is this movie, and I think it's a strength of Mangold's films in general, is so clearly, it has such clear themes in it, has such a clear point to it, as opposed to Kingdom of Crystal Skull, which is like, let's have another adventure.
Well, and specifically what I was getting at with the whole like idea of faith-based magic, if that's what you want to call it, is the idea that while this movie on its surface sort of leans away from that theme, I think the theme of faith, and specifically faith in other people and faith in the like idea of Indiana Jones as an institution, is what this movie is sort of about, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I think in some ways that's why having an outsider of the franchise come in to tell it, I won't say made it better, but made it what it is. I don't think Spielberg would have made this movie, even if there's so many nods echoes things that
He's
Spielberg.
too close.
Exactly. I think this is clearly a movie made by a guy who has spent his life looking at Indiana Jones and is evaluating that, but is also doing it in a way Mangold talked about. He goes, and I've seen, of course, people say, like, "Well, Mangold out against the fans," but he's right about this, where he just goes, sometimes fans love these characters so much they don't want them to be anything other than the action figure they have on their shelf.
People like the platonic ideal of a thing, and the idea of that thing changing from what you have in the back of your head is upsetting to fans.
The ultimate example of that being Last Jedi, right?
Yeah, 100%.
And that was sort of the thing, but it's Mangold going like, it was my job as a filmmaker to tell a story about a person, not an icon.
But at the same time, this movie is a guy who is an icon, and who he is an icon to, and how that reflects throughout the movie is what the story this movie is trying to tell, right? It's a man who, like, he knows he's not an icon, but everybody else in this movie sees him as this not messianic, but definitely like fixture of mythology, mythological figure that is Indiana Jones.
Absolutely, and that's so much of the thing. And also, that was where Mangold goes, that's also why I wanted to, and this is where we'll start talking about this movie specifically, I feel like, because we have to. He goes, that's why I wanted to give you 20 minutes where he is exactly the Indiana Jones you remember. And the beginning of this movie,
fucking love the first 20 minutes of this movie.
It's the best beginning of an Indiana Jones movie. It is so... It is exactly that. It is just... right in my vein, man. Just shoot Indiana Jones right in my vein. And this is the thing I always talk about when people complain about these movies, and some of the criticism I've seen of this movie is like, no, you are comparing this film to your memory of being 8 years old and seeing Raiders of the Lost Ark. And for 20 minutes, he gives you what it was like to be 8 years old watching the coolest guy you've ever seen. And is this the best we've seen of de-aging?
I don't know. I was having this conversation last night with my girlfriend after we saw the movie, and like, I think there are bits of this where it's some of the best I've ever seen. I think there's a couple of moments where the lighting is like not quite there, and like I can see the seams a little bit, but
the places I felt that in were more in the action beats than in the like acting beats. You know, when it's close on him and they can really get in there, but when he's like running and things are there's a couple places it's really good. It's really good.
I maintain the best we've seen is Samuel L. Jackson, but it's really easy to make him look a lot younger.
That's true. That is true. The other thing that I love about this is they go, we de-age Mads too. We just don't have any context for what, this sort of thing where it's like, that's also really good. You can tell, but it's one of those things where it's like, it doesn't blow you away because we don't really know what Mads Mikkelsen looked like 25 years ago.
I guess the problem I have with the de-aging in this movie is the same issue I had with The Irishman, whereas like we know what young Harrison Ford sounded like in the same way that we knew what a young De Niro sounded like. And so to hear old man Harrison Ford's voice coming out of young Harrison Ford feels weird.
Yeah, that's true. But every iconic moment of this, it also gave me what I've always wanted to see since Crystal Skull, because I was like, damn, when we skip over World War II with Crystal Skull, and they talk about, man, all those adventures you had with U.S. intelligence, I'm like, I want to see World War II spy Indiana Jones so bad, and we get it here. We meet him, and he's undercover as a Nazi. Oh, it's so good.
Recovering the Lance of Longinus from the Nazis, like that is peak Indiana Jones right there.
It has that James Bond movie kind of opening where you're like, dude, this isn't even about the thing. I mean, we'll get the time travel device is here, or it's not actually. It's actually not a time machine. It's basically a compass for breaks and fissures in time, right?
John, you let me know when you want me to go off about the time travel in this movie.
I have a theory about. Or I was watching this movie thinking about what Gorgoni's going to think about time travel.
Okay.
But I do think it's interesting.
You tell me when you want me to start talking about it, and I'll start talking about it.
Because the whole thing is here. It's this sort of like, I do love. I gotta say, I think maybe maybe my favorite villain in Indiana Jones. And Indiana Jones is not known. I will say, Indiana Jones doesn't have the James Bond thing. The villains in Indiana Jones are not massively iconic.
No, because what they're trying to do is misuse some piece of mythological history for their own evil ends, and Indiana Jones is just the fly in their ointment that shows up out of nowhere and totally disrupts what they're trying to do.
But I do think, to me, Jürgen Voller, played by Mads Mikkelsen, is the most interesting of the bunch, in my opinion, because I love how insane what he wants to do is.
Spoiler alert for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. We're going to be spoiling the whole movie. I just want to get that out of the way right now. There are some twists in this movie that I think are great and are worth seeing in theaters. I guess before we get too deep into this, I will recommend going to see this movie. I think it's a lot of fun. I have my issues with it, which we're about to discuss, but yes.
Highly recommend it. And yeah, I mean, in the classic like Indiana Jones movie, made to be seen in a theater, made to be seen on a big spectacle. This is a big spectacle movie. It's gigantic.
The fact that the evil Nazis' plan is to go back in time and kill Hitler had me rolling in my seat.
I love that because you're like, oh, because even when I had kind of pieced together from the trailers, like it's time trial. Oh, he's going to go back and make Germany win the war. And that's even what Indy thinks he's doing. But no, he's like, no, that guy's a fucking idiot and somebody needs to do it better.
So his plan is to go back in time and make Germany win the war by removing Germany's biggest weakness in the war, Adolf Hitler.
So good. When that was revealed, I'm like, oh my God, that's great.
Because A, it's like a good plan. B, it's the classic time travel question of, do you go back in time and kill Hitler? And this Nazi says yes.
Because in his mind, Hitler was bad for the Nazis. Oh,
yeah.
It's so good. It's so good, man. It's just if only we didn't have that moron, we would have done so much better.
Most historians agree that is correct. Because Adolf Hitler was a fucking lunatic. Even beyond the whole, like, genocidal fuckhead that he was. He was also, like, hopped up on speed all the time. Yeah. And a paranoid lunatic. And, like, there were lots of issues with Hitler. I'm not saying we're better off with a Hitler in charge, but like if someone more competent was in charge of the Third Reich, things might have been different. And that's the question this movie asks.
He pretty much only got as far as he did because he did have some competent people with him. On his own, Hitler would have achieved absolutely nothing because he was just a raving madman, right? Like that sort of thing. If you didn't have Goebbels and stuff like that around him to actually go like, well, go over this way though, then he wouldn't have even achieved what he achieved. So I think that is, but so that's Voller's. But I love this introduction of Voller as the Nazi archaeologist, mathematician guy, or I mean, what is he? He's a physicist. He's like a mathematical physicist.
He's evil Indiana Jones.
That's the other thing I was gonna say about they're kind of all the Indiana Jones villains are kind of evil Indiana, except for Molaram in Temple of Doom, who's a crazy thuggy cult leader. But all the Belloc and Walter Donovan and Colonel Dr. Irina Spalko, they're all basic because the only that makes sense, right? Because the only way anyone would be seeking these items is if they know what Indiana Jones knows. So they have to on some level be knowledgeable of the thing and have some kind of respect for it. The only difference is the villains want to possess it and use it, and Indiana Jones wants to protect it and preserve it.
Or destroy it in certain cases.
In certain cases, yeah. But I mean, the classic refrain of it belongs in a museum. You know, it's just like, this is a cultural item. And also, Indiana Jones kind of doesn't... I mean, it is always the running joke Indiana Jones fans go, is like, every single movie, he's like, the whatever... Holy Grail, that's bullshit. Like, it's just like how much magic this guy's seen, and every single time he's like, that's not real.
Well, and we even see it at the beginning of this movie when he finally gets the lance, and it's like, that's a fake.
Mm-hmm. Well, I do love that the whole thing is just like, oh, actually, the Nazis don't have it at all. But the whole thing in it is Voller at the beginning of the movie going like, that lance is, even if that lance, it doesn't, look at this thing, man. This thing's got power. And they're like, shut up, nerd.
It's like... So certain Nazis will be okay with the Lance of Longinus being the mystical relic that will win them the war, but when they're hand-picked evil scientist says, but no, time travel.
Well, the colonel guy at the beginning of this movie, the Nazi colonel or whatever, his whole thing is just like, yeah, but the Fuhrer wants the lance. So we just kind of do what the Fuhrer is asking.
Thomas Kretschmann has such a bad guy face. He's the colonel.
He really
at the beginning
does.
Of this movie.
It is one of those things where it's like, dude, I can't believe you haven't already been in one of these. Like, to a certain extent, right? Like, Thomas Kretschmann, I've seen be so many, sometimes it's Nazis, but he always just is, yeah, that's right. We just, over on Meet the Monsters, we just recently recorded an episode about Blade 2, where he plays Damaskinos, the main vampire bad guy in that.
Well, and he was great. Strucker in Age of Ultron, and
he was the perfect Strucker, right?
Yeah, I mean, he's been in a thousand things.
He played
and he's
Dracula.
almost always some bad guy.
He played Dracula in Dario Argento's Dracula. Like, just about him. It is a great use of him. He plays a Nazi in the movie Valkyrie with Tom Cruise.
Mm-hmm. Well, to be fair, basically everyone plays a Nazi in that movie.
Yes, I mean, that is the point of that movie, was the internal assassination. Talk about Nazis trying to kill Hitler. That's a true story.
Yeah.
Great movie, by the way. Highly recommend Valkyrie. Really like that movie. It is great because he has to come in here and just be, you're like, oh, he's the bad guy of the Indiana Jones movie we didn't see.
Right. I mean, the cold open of this film is such a good, like, Bondian cold open, because it is, like, the end of the mission that we don't see interstitially.
And what I love is also you get another one of my favorite character actors, Toby Jones, as this character who we've never seen before. And the indie movies, one of the things I love about them is they always imply so much stuff. It's like, it's the same thing with the way Short Round comes in Temple of Doom, and you're just like, wait, when did he have a kid? Oh, I guess he just got one and we just didn't see it. Same thing here. It's like Toby Jones and him have been running around doing missions together. I don't know who this guy is, but they're best pals.
Can we talk about the insane billing on this movie and how Antonio Banderas gets third billing in this film for being one of those characters?
Yes. And he obviously gets that because he's Antonio Banderas.
Sure, but
basically doing an extended cameo is what you're saying.
Yeah, and he's third billed in the credits.
And he's fucking great in his 3 scenes. But yeah, no, there is it does feel like I think Mads Mikkelsen actually got the and, but I was going to say Antonio Banderas feels like he should have got the and.
Or the with.
Maybe give me a with Antonio Banderas and Mads Mikkelsen. There you go.
Yeah.
There's something for you, because it does feel like, I mean, obviously you've got your two leads here, which, oh boy, just avoid anybody talking about this movie on YouTube that's not us or a reputable film source, because
John, are you saying that misogynistic assholes have a problem with Phoebe Waller-Bridge?
Yeah, who I find to just be an absolute treasure, and
she's so charming in this film.
She's wonderful in everything I've ever seen her in. She's so good in Solo as well. She's just amazing, an incredible woman. She's gonna be, who knows? Once again, when I say she's gonna be. But at least the plan at the moment is she's going to run a Tomb Raider show on Amazon, which I would be more than excited about. She's an excellent writer. She did a lot of the rewrites for No Time to Die, the last Bond movie. But yeah, they're your two lead bills. But yeah, it's just like Antonio Banderas is just like, that's just movie star.
But he's another one of those characters where it's like, there's this implied history of Indiana Jones in which he has this web of connections around the world because he is this mythical figure who's met everybody and been everywhere.
And that starts even in Raiders, right? Like, we get Sala back in this, which Sala, please, more Sala, always. I love Sala. And John Rhys Davies is so back to, and they have him singing Gilbert and Sullivan at the end, which I'm like, yes. They're doing the things.
There were 3 people in the theater I was in that actually laughed at that, and I was like, I get you, movie.
A British man is a sailing solid. But even the way he's introduced in Raiders is just a guy Indy knows. Like, right from movie 1, it's not like we ever saw him meet Sala, and I kind of don't want to see. Even Marion Ravenwood, his love interest, is his ex-girlfriend, and they had a whole relationship before the first movie even started. Like, that's the thing I love. And so here we jump into, you're just like, I don't know, Indy's on a spy mission. We don't see him get that spy mission or even fully know what it's about until we're on the train, and he's got this partner who's been his partner for a while, and it's apparently enough of his best pal that he made him godfather to his daughter. I love all that stuff, and Toby Jones is great. Once again, lots of really, like Antonio Banderas, like Toby Jones, like Thomas Kretschmann, a lot of really good actors in little parts here. Mangold's very smart about like, oh, okay, I have this little part that only has so much to do, but if I get a really good actor, they'll imbue them with a humanity that will make them seem like they've existed, even though they're only in a couple scenes.
I even liked Ethan Isidore as Teddy, the new short round in this film.
Oh, loved him. Thought he was great.
That could have been a very thankless role, and like throwing a kid or a young person in that role was sort of a risk because it's so easy for the audience to be like, ugh, another kid tagging along with Indy.
It does feel that. Although what I like about that is that he's Helena's short round, right? Like she has her own short round because obviously, and this is not a new thing, but it works really well here in the Lego sequel. Is Helena is younger Indiana Jones, right? When Indiana Jones was a little bit more impetuous and less ethical, and a little bit more like we saw Indy in Temple of Doom when he's talking about fortune and glory and stuff like that. So she's on her own beginning of a trajectory that we're seeing here, and he's sort of seeing a reflection of his younger self in her, and so including the short round.
Yeah,
and actually, her story about meeting Teddy is very similar to what Indy says about finding short round in Temple of Doom. So, no, I really enjoyed him. And I also really enjoyed that's just good screenwriting, the whole thing about him intellectually knowing how to fly a plane.
Yeah.
Like, he knows how to do it. He's just never done it. And so then at the end of the movie, he ends up flying the plane into the past. No, because as I had heard so much, I didn't know what happened. But everything I heard about this movie in its early screens was like, and then the third act is bonkers.
I was super worried because, like you, I'd pretty much figured like, okay, there's going to be some time travel thing in this film.
Yeah.
I kind of figured that this movie was going to loop back in on itself and we were going to have a replay of the opening sequence with two Indies, because that feels like the easy, like, crowd-pleasing choice to have done. It's very similar to what they did in Endgame go all the way back to the Future 2, right?
Yes.
Like, replay the hits, replay the thing works. But when we see Roman fucking triremes on the sea outside of Syracuse, my face lit up.
That was the thing where it's like, and Mangold said in the first draft he wrote that was the ending he had, was they go back to Nazi Germany and it turns into a big chase across World War II, and it would have been. And then he goes, well, wait a minute, is there something more interesting? Because that is, I mean, as you're saying that, you thought that's where it was going, because that is where logically one would think it would go, and so that's where he first went. And then it's like, no, man, he's like, if I'm going to do time travel, I'm going all in on this.
Go nuts
and
with
also,
it,
and it's so much better as a story for two reasons. There's the thematic reason, which we'll talk about, which is so much about what the movie's about. But two, of course, just the idea of a guy who's devoted his life to history getting to experience history in that way. And you have that. I mean, I gotta say too, like, not that he's bad in King of the Crystal Skull. I think the script is just better here. Ford is so good in this movie, which is like, it of course we take it for granted. He could play this character in his sleep, right? He's one of our greatest actors. This is his most iconic role.
Well, and Harrison Ford is one of those actors who, in the back half of his career, you can see projects that he's jazzed about and ones that he's not, and he's probably just there for a paycheck, right?
Sure.
Harrison Ford can be checked out on films, and you can kind of tell.
You telling me he wasn't locked into Ender's Game?
I'm telling you, he wasn't locked into Ender's Game. I don't think he was necessarily locked in on Cowboys versus Aliens. Like, there's plenty of movies.
Yeah, Cowboys. No, he definitely is a guy who you can get. There are times when it's like, not that he's ever bad, but there are definitely times when it's like, yeah, I'm at half speed here.
Right. And look, when you get to an actor at his stage in his career, go for it, man. Like, you earned it.
Yeah.
But
yeah,
when he turns it on, you can tell. And I think, like, this movie, obviously, I think Force Awakens, despite what you might say about that movie. Harrison Ford's giving a really good performance in that film.
He's great in that. Blade Runner 2049 he's amazing in as well. I think what he's doing on TV, I don't know if you've watched any Shrinking.
I just started. I love that show.
He's amazing in it, though, and it does feel like he's cut loose in a way. And he talks about it. He goes, I love doing these scripts because I get to do comedy. I never get to do this kind of thing. And you can see it. He lights up. I think sometimes when people talk about him seeming old, it's that in some of those movies he does seem old because he's like, and I feel like it ebbs and flows in Crystal Skull. I think anytime he's on screen with Karen Allen, that chemistry is undeniable. They're amazing. Their one scene in this movie brought a tear to my eye because it's beautiful, and they're incredible together. But then there are other moments when it's like, and I think a lot of that comes from they didn't have a script anyone was thrilled about on Crystal Skull, and so they were sort of making it up. So I do think there's a lot of like, what am I doing? All right, Yeah. And I think there's even that in, I think, I think Return of the Jedi he's kind of checked out on a little bit. Not fully.
Yeah, no, but first off, there's not a lot for Han Solo to do in that.
And apparently
film, really.
He talked about that. He kept saying that to Lucas while making that. He's going like, what am I doing? That's why, that was always the thing about he wanted him to get killed off, because he goes, at least that'd be something. I can sacrifice myself, because I don't really do anything in this movie. And he's not wrong. I mean, there's some great moments he has in it. Once again, Ford, never bad. Ford at half speed is still better than most actors.
Sure. But we sort of just fall into his relationship with Leia, and there's no real it's just accepted that they're good throughout that film.
It doesn't have the heat and energy that Empire and the first movie have, right? And that's something I do like that I think he and Karen Allen have kept doing. And actually, though, then when you talk about it, he's very good in Force Awakens because there's a reframing of that. Now, people have brought up the similarities between what became of Han and Leia's relationship and what has become of Indy and Marion's relationship in this movie.
What do you feel about them killing Shia LaBeouf off screen in this film?
I like what it does. I like where it puts Indy. I don't know that that's what, because I'm one of those people. I didn't mind Mutt Williams. I didn't love the character, but I don't think he was this detriment to the franchise. I like what it does for his character, though. I like where we find Indiana Jones in this movie. As a guy who, because, I mean, once again, to get back to the themes, it's sort of this idea about this guy who's like, the world has no place for me anymore, right? I'm an old timer. And so, having lost my son, the thing I lived for, having lost my wife as a result of that. And you watch a guy, it's interesting that we're talking about checked out, because you're also, in this movie, consciously, once we jump to 1969, it's a checked out Indiana Jones, right? He's sort of going through the motions as a teacher with a bunch of students who don't give a shit about what he's talking about, which I love that whole scene when he's talking about the past, and they're like, yeah, but the moon landing.
And he has just no real concept of, not necessarily the moon landing, but he is so wrapped up in the importance of the past and how it's built the present that he is not looking towards the future, right? And his loss of his son plays into that as well.
And I think that's further burrowed him into the past then. So I like that. Whether or not that's sort of doing Mutt Williams dirty, I don't know.
There's a lot of sweeping Crystal Skull under the rug in this film. That's what it felt like to me.
Sure.
And that, whether or not that's good storytelling or not, I don't know, but it does do a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of where we find Indy at this as we get to present day with the character.
And I think that's true, and I think I would be more upset about it if the script wasn't as good about doing stuff with Indy for that. And I think the other thing is not that you have to sweep Crystal Skull under the rug, but Crystal Skull doesn't, weirdly, for a movie that gives Indy his son and has him get married to Marion, kind of doesn't advance him as a character that much. So it's not that you have to sweep it under the rug, but it's just there's not a ton of character threads. There's story threads, but there's not a ton of character threads to pick up on from that movie. It's not like I left that movie going ooh, where will this continue for Indiana Jones? That kind of felt like an ending of sorts.
No, weirdly, this movie retroactively makes Crystal Skull a little bit more impactful because there are things that Indiana Jones can lose now, important things, family and loved ones. Is it implied that Mutt Williams dies in Korea, I guess?
Or early Vietnam.
Or early Vietnam, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it would have been... Yeah, either one. I don't know exactly. Yeah, he joined up. I took it... I guess I interpreted Vietnam only because that's omnipresent at this point, and that would be where so many people lost their sons. And also the idea of that he... I mean, I love the whole thing about, like, oh, he signed up. He wasn't drafted. It was like he was mad at me. So that further puts Indy blaming himself. And you get the sense of that's probably what broke up him and Marion, is not so much...
Well, he says as much.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, I did that. I mean, but just the idea that this guy was just like, well, then it's my fault. Our son's dead. And, you know, and this whole idea about, like, I also love this whole thing about, like, I didn't know what to say to her. And so you get the sense, here's a guy who probably just retreated into academia.
Yeah.
And then eventually...
he didn't know how to try to support Marion in her pain because of his own guilt and regret revolving around the fact that he wasn't there for this kid's basically entire childhood and adolescence, and then he tries to become a father figure in Crystal Skull and then also kind of fails at that.
Well, and here, of course, you've got, as Mangold said, what ultimately comes from this is you have a character, you have a father who's looking for you have a guy looking for someone to father, and then a woman who's never had a father, really. And that's, you know, I mean, this when we're dealing in, like, big blockbuster stuff here, one could talk about these themes are very obvious, but they're solid themes. And
they're
and
classics and tropes for a reason.
Yeah, it's sort of the thing where I sort of go, like, people go like, oh, well, of course that's the thing. It's like, well, it's still ultimately a movie that's built around, like, Indiana Jones being chased by Nazis. So, like, yeah, big emotional themes kind of need to be stated. But I will say, I do think this movie has more of a maturity to it than any of the other ones. Like, the idea of Indiana Jones racked with grief over the death of his son is not something you could imagine any of the previous iterations of this character dealing with. It really does feel... And I know that's something that they talked about. The Crystal Skull, I mean, they gave him a son, they gave him a past, but it didn't really feel like that was like, boy, this is old Indiana Jones.
No,
whereas this one really does feel
midlife crisis Indiana Jones.
Right, exactly. You know, and somebody did talk about it. It is very funny. I think that Ford was like 65 in that movie, and people were like, Jesus, he's still doing this at 65, and now here he is at 80. You know, and he's looking good, man. I gotta say, like, I didn't. I think some of that is, and Ford even talked about this, like, Indiana Jones is actually 70 in the movie, but like, Indiana Jones is an elderly man, so it never feels like, what's he doing?
Yeah.
It never feels like, God, he's still trying to play 40-year-old Indiana Jones, except for the beginning where they're consciously doing that.
I did appreciate that this movie isn't really trying to make Indiana Jones still the guy who can, like, leap across ravines and stuff, but they also didn't lean on the... I'm a near invalid. Like, we have that bit where they're climbing the rocks and he stops and he goes just like, everything hurts. Why am I still doing this?
Yeah. It's like, I guess I still can, but God, it's harder than it used to be. Yeah. Because you do get stuff like, you know, you get the awesome, the tuk-tuk chase I thought was great. When you're
I really enjoyed that.
That was a lot of fun.
I will say, my biggest complaint about this movie is that every single action set piece is a chase. Literally all of them.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm just trying to think, because that's kind of what Indiana Jones movies mostly are, though, aren't they?
To an extent, yeah. And, like, but there's never the stand and fight moment in this movie that the other indie movies usually have.
Yeah,
and I don't know, like.
Well, you
somebody asked me last night, like, "Hey, are there any good Nazi deaths in this movie?" And it's like, there's no like him throwing somebody into a propeller. There's no like Nazis getting their face melted off. Like, I think there's a lot of Nazi deaths in this movie, and I think some of them have like incredibly interesting and fun circumstances. Seeing a World War II era bomber crash land on the walls of Syracuse while the Romans are invading is fucking rad. But
it's rad, and the thing I love too, because every Indiana Jones villain can't just die. You have to see the absolutely charred corpse of Jürgen Voller. You know what I mean? Like, every they have to be decimated for having messed with this stuff, right?
Yeah.
They all
the only
get
good
melted
Nazi's a
or
dead
vaporized.
Nazi.
Yeah, you get all that stuff. One of the interesting things because I do I'm a big fan of the James Bonding podcast, and they've recently done a show within a show, which is Indiana Jonesing, leading up to this movie. But something I thought that was very interesting that Matt Mira, who I love Matt Mira, but that I thought was so interesting that he was really upset by the civilian deaths in this movie. So many innocent people are killed in this movie, and he goes, "Well, that's just not the fun of Indiana Jones when people are just murdered."
You know, that's honestly interesting because I've heard similar takes from like mutual friends of ours and just people online where it's like explicitly the two college professors at the beginning of this movie who get gunned down, and like some of the other civilian deaths in this movie are not necessarily something that has been a part of the Indiana Jones franchise. Obviously, there are like innocents that are harmed because of evil Nazi plans, and that will happen, but just like the casual gunning down of people in the routine course of their nefarious schemes is a new brutal aspect to this film.
I think it's a new brutal aspect, but I liked it in as much as I just love innocent people getting killed. No, I liked it in as much as it tells you like, oh shit, these guys are not, this is not Belloc or Walter Donovan, or these are Nazis. These are vicious. Boyd Holbrook is a killer in this movie.
Boyd Holbrook is scary in this film, but Oliver Richters, who plays Hawk, the absolutely gigantic evil Nazi guy, is such a presence in this film. It's just that is a big human.
That is a very Indiana Jones thing. There's always like a couple henchmen, and one of them has to be gigantic. In fact, in the first couple movies, he's always played by the same guy. I don't know if you know this. The same stunt guy is the guy who goes into the plane propeller in Raiders, is also the big thuggy guard that he fights in Temple of Doom, is also there's this guy that they just kept using. So I always think of it sort of an ode to that guy, that there's got to be like this gigantic dude. But yeah, this guy is I guess we saw him in Black Widow as well. And he
was the guy arm wrestling what's his name?
Red Guardian.
Red Guardian.
Yeah. 7'1" they've got this guy listed at. Good lord.
Yeah, 7'1" tall and 8'5" wide.
Yeah, that's the thing. I guess technically he was playing Ursa Major in that, wasn't he?
Well, okay, come on, sure. Whatever.
His nickname is the Dutch Giant, according to his IMDb. And he is absolutely terrifying. Yeah, the villains in this movie are distinctly less fun on purpose. They are so laser focused, and even Voller, who definitely has a villain kind of I mean, Mads Mikkelsen, just in general, there's more fun to him. He's having more fun in this than he did as Le Chiffre in Casino Royale, where he was very just and crying blood. The thing I've recently discovered about this guy, massive fucking nerd. Nerd, Mads Mikkelsen. Yeah, they were at the premiere of the movie, and they were talking about, well, this movie, Indiana Jones is always about treasure. What's your greatest treasure in life? He goes, bond on my comic book collection. He goes, I have an amazing comic book collection. And he just kept talking. He goes, I just can't believe it. I'm in an Indiana Jones movie. This is the greatest thing in the world. And they were talking about, what do you want to do next? He goes, I really want to do a movie where I get to kill zombies. I just want to be in a zombie. I just want to shoot zombies in a movie. Just like this guy, he is not like so many of the bad guy actors, right? He is not an intense dude at all. He's a goof who loves pop culture and genre stuff. So that fills me with joy, knowing that he's having the time of his life, going, I can't believe I'm fighting Indiana Jones.
And the bad guys are always the more fun, like, roles, right? Being able to relish being an evil asshole is, like, more enjoyable as an actor a lot of the time.
And Voller is so, like a lot of good villains, right? He's so, like, no, this is what has to be done, man. Like, hear me out on this. I'm right. Like, this will make everything better. So you are just like, you're insane.
When he has the line early in the film to the bellhop at the hotel, it's just like, you didn't win, Hitler lost. It was just like, this is an evil Nazi.
Right from the pitch for this being in 1969, too, and Mangold talking about the Operation Paperclip, I'm like, that's how you get Nazis back. That's so smart to figure out where, okay, it would be about this time. If you set it kind of around the space program, I can work a Nazi scientist in there in a way, and that was very good. And yes, Boyd Holbrook, by the way, who we talk about, he's great in this. He's fast becoming one of my favorite actors. He is doing amazing work. He was also in Logan for Mangold, where he was one of the villains in that, and he was great. We just saw him be he talk about he's scary in this. He was fucking terrifying as the Corinthian on Sandman. Good.
Oh,
Lord.
So good, yeah.
And he's gonna be the villain in the new season of Justified that's coming out next week. If you're listening to this when it comes out, which I can't wait for. One of my all-time favorite shows, Justified.
Boyd Holbrook versus Timothy Olyphant. Yes, please.
Yeah. Yes, that's right, and he's the classic Justified villain where he thinks he's a better gunslinger than Marshall Raylan Givens. So,
wow, he's about to get himself some learning through bullets, I think.
Yeah, I have a feeling he's going to end up shot full of holes by the end of that, but I cannot wait for that. That's going to be great, but also very funny. A movie I highly recommend people check out is Vengeance, which is B.J. Novak's directorial debut.
What a very vague title for a film.
But that was sort of the impetus of it. Was B.J. Novak said, he's like, wouldn't it be funny if there's a movie called Vengeance and my face was on the poster? And that indeed it
was. Fair.
And so that's what it did. Very funny, but he's great in it and very funny and lovable. Not terrifying, really cool. So really talented dude. Also, a little werewolf movie he did a couple years ago called The Cursed is also kind of a little horror gem that I recommend people check out too. So anyway, I love him, and he also is so scary and evil, but clearly is loving it. Like, there's such joy in this movie. I think that's the thing that is different from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, which once again is a movie I think is totally fine and watchable, but did sort of feel like everybody's going like, yeah, we're happy to be back, but kind of we don't know. This movie is so assured and in a way feels like it's made by people who are like, we are jazzed. Ford has always been more in love with this role than Han Solo. Like, it was always like pulling teeth to get him to come back to Star Wars or talk about Star Wars. Whereas Indiana Jones, he's like, I want to do it all day, every day. It's my favorite thing ever. Like, because I remember them talking about, like, all the press for, like, oh, you playing Han Solo again? Would you want to do Indiana Jones? He would just keep going, in a New York minute. I love doing it. And I know he was also very big on and pushing Mangold towards, I really want to give an ending to this guy. I really want to give a last story.
Well, look, the truth of the matter is, like, Han Solo's no spring chicken. I don't want to get, like, too morbid about this, but, like, guy is over 80 at this point. You want to have the author of these legendary characters write the ending of them, right? Like, that just feels correct.
And it kind of does become, at the end of the day, it is sort of like, oh, Spielberg's not directing, Lucas isn't involved, but you do kind of go like, yeah, but at a certain point, Indiana Jones became Harrison Ford. And so if Harrison Ford is really leading the charge, then that's kind of the most, not to take away the other things, but it's like, if that guy's really enthused, then I'm enthused, is kind of, I guess, my attitude about that, right? It's like, yeah, he is the ultimate protector of the character. He is the one, you know, they always talk about that. Directors, they care about them. Actors have to care most about their part. Directors are thinking holistically. It's like, he is so protective of the actual character of Dr. Henry Jones Jr.
Yeah. No, and look, I'm a realist. I could see in 15 years or whatever, there might be another actor who uses the name Indiana Jones at some point.
I wouldn't be surprised at all. I'm sure Disney's already, like, apparently in, like, they're going like, what would a Disney Plus show about Indiana Jones
be? And look, that wouldn't even be the first time that it happened. We had The Adventures of Young Indiana Jones.
We did, so. and actually I would love to see a better version. That was a totally Lucas spearheaded thing, and he goes, I really want to use it to be a educational show about history. I'm like, ooh, no one else wants that. I remember watching it as a kid and being jazzed because I loved Indiana Jones and kind of going, why is this boring? It's like
you turn fun into homework, as they say on
it is sort of like, exactly. It's sort of like, do you want to see Indiana Jones meet Ernest Hemingway? Not really, no. Is he gonna punch somebody anytime soon? Yeah, so I would not be opposed to the idea of seeing a new version of the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles at some point here.
Yeah.
As we kind of, how do you feel about this then as the last chapter of Indiana Jones?
I think it's a good finale. I think it's a good send off of the character. I think everything lands where it should to feel like we're closing a book and we can walk away satisfied. I have my gripes about this movie. We can talk about some of the historical inaccuracies that make me fidget in my seat.
Okay, all right. There's 100%. I was trying to go what are your? I was gonna go Mike Gorgoni's gripe corner, and as soon as you said that, I'm like, all right. So that nothing I thought about at all. I'm sure then.
Sure, Archimedes died at that battle. That's a thing that happened. He didn't survive the siege of Syracuse. As a historical person, that is where he died.
Okay. All right.
I'm just saying.
I didn't know that. I can tell you I don't really know much about Archimedes beyond.
And the idea that that whole situation happened in the middle of the Second Punic War is not something this movie cares about, and that's fine.
Because the whole. It's cool to see them come out and you're talking about in a Nazi bomber, and suddenly there'd be Roman ships and stuff, and that was so. I love seeing the big spears clang into the side of the plane, and you're going oh, this is awesome.
And the whole Romans reporting on wild weaponry that the city had that Archimedes supposedly designed is all historically accurate to a degree. Mostly all of that stuff was written 60 years after it happened, but.
Because there's always, every Indiana Jones movie takes a kernel of a real thing. Everything is a real-ish thing, right?
Yeah.
Whether that be biblical or historical.
Right. But, wasted a bit of a wasted opportunity in this movie. Famously, there's a story of how Archimedes died during this battle, which is always, one of those more entertaining bits of historical, bric-a-brac that washes up on the shores of what we've recovered from 2,000 years ago.
Right.
Is this idea that Archimedes was killed in the siege of Syracuse when the Romans were invading the city and starting to hack everything down and kick down doors. Some Roman legionnaire kicks in the door, sees Archimedes, and is like, "You come with me. You're a prisoner of the Romans at this point, because we're not yet the Roman Empire. We're still the Republic technically." But Archimedes, as a completely absorbed guy who's just about inventing in math and geometry, is just give me a minute, I need to finish this. Don't bother me right now, I'm busy making a calculation. And the soldier's so irate that this guy, who has no idea that the city is burning down around him because he's too busy figuring out the circumference of a circle, just kills him. And then the Romans are like, "You killed Archimedes, you fucking idiot."
That is interesting. What they didn't know is he was calculating where a time fissure would open.
Right. Well, and this movie posits that Archimedes escapes Syracuse and goes on to invent the Dial of Destiny.
Yeah. And that's also very Indiana Jones. It's we're going to take a kernel history and then put an Indiana Jones spin on it.
Sure, but the idea that this sets up that there's an alternate timeline in which Indiana Jones specifically managed to get back in time and get Archimedes out of the city to one extent or another.
Hell yeah, man! What can't Indiana Jones do? The thing I was gonna say, but we gotta talk about the time travel, because I actually feel like you would like the time travel of this movie, because when they get into, because the whole end of the movie is they get to the tomb of Archimedes, and they follow all the clues. It's very classic Indiana Jones. They're doing I should say this movie does all the Indiana Jones stuff I want to see, other than just chases and punching Nazis and stuff like that. It also does all the finding of clues, which I think is always great, and to me would always be what would be my death in writing these. That would
solving tomb puzzles, great stuff.
That stuff is great, but I always just think about it. I'd love to write an Indiana Jones movie. Then I would hate to. I just want to come up with reasons why he's blowing up a Nazi plane. I don't like the idea of, or finding a thing is cool, but then you got to lay all the 8 things that whatever. So they finally get to the end of this movie. We do get we get 2 creepy crawlies in this movie, because the creepy crawlies are part of it. I love the eels as sea snakes. Very clever.
It had to be snakes.
I just say that one kind of looks like a snake. No, it doesn't. It's one of my favorite bits actually in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull is when he gets when he's in the quicksand and Mutt throws the snake to pull him out, and he goes, "Just call it a rope." What do you mean? Just say it's a rope. Like, it just that's that further thing where it's just like, if I don't have the snake thought, I can maybe get through it. That was very fun.
Right.
And then, but then we get the bugs, and specifically like the millipedes in the tomb. Yeah. I love that though. That's very much classic. The Spielberg Indiana Jones thing is at some point in the movie you need to go, ugh.
Yeah.
That's
corridor with all the bugs got me like shivering in my seat.
It was really good. So when you finally get there, yes, but they're doing, in my mind, the time travel that you like, which is it's always happened, right? Like it's all.
Well, again, what time travel I like is consistent time travel that makes sense.
Yes, I mean, this is always my point. My favorite time travel movie, of course, is Back to the Future, which is consistent unto itself.
Sure.
We don't need to relitigate that. We've long talked about Zemeckis' time travel.
Yeah, Zemeckis has his. The first movie is consistent among itself. I'll grant you that.
When you didn't like when it started looping back on itself.
Yeah, it became an Ouroboros with multiple heads and that.
Yeah, that's my jam. I love
this movie. Proposes a single loop, right?
Yes.
Insofar as that the time travel that Archimedes perpetrated wasn't that he went into the future, it's that the future came back to him, and that is what we saw at the end of this film.
Right. And so
that's
the
only
idea
that one instance of time travel ever happened or will ever happen.
Right. And so you see all the pieces of that having already been there. The watch, the plane, right? The thing, it's already there in the tomb before they've even gone back.
What doesn't make any sense about the time travel in this film is why Mads Mikkelsen's character would think it would lead anywhere else.
Oh, you're talking about like the whole thing about the when Indy figures out he didn't account for continental drift,
or just like what in all of this makes them believe that this rift in time that this dial can predict would lead to anywhere specific, like say 1939 before the Nazis invade Poland.
That's a good point. I mean, it is just sort of taken on faith, right? That like,
and that's the thing. That's where this movie leans into those themes that I was talking about earlier, where it's just like the bad guy of this film is so convinced that he can accomplish and rewrite history in a way that was always going to be impossible, but because he is so bent on this evil plan, he is blinded to the idea that it could not happen.
Right, exactly. It's sort of well, because the whole thing is, right, it's not a time machine. It's not the DeLorean where you can type in a date and go there. It is, I'm going to fly through this opening in time, but yeah, what is controlling where in time I'm coming out?
Literally nothing. And the only thing,
because the dial just leads you to the fissure. It doesn't control
that's it.
Where it's taking you. It doesn't
precisely.
The dial doesn't actually have any power unto itself.
All the dial is doing is pointing you towards this hole in space-time that will lead you to Syracuse in 213 BC. Yeah. And that is all it will ever do, and that is all it can do.
And to be fair, I think what you would say, too, is we don't really, because we don't really know what Mads Mikkelsen has learned about this thing. We only get the pieces of it. So I don't know how he expects to do that, but everybody's geared up in their World War II Nazi uniforms and an old plane. He obviously is very convinced he's going to get back to there specifically. You do get the moment when Indy realizes, wait a minute, you've made a mistake in your calculation. He didn't account for continental drift.
But again, that doesn't make a ton of sense if this rift in time was only ever going to lead to one place.
Right, that's the thing, right? Is it's he didn't account for where it would physically where it would take him. Like it wouldn't be Germany.
But the idea that Archimedes did, even though Indiana Jones says Archimedes wouldn't have accounted for that, but he clearly did. Because Archimedes at the end of this movie says, you were only ever going to meet me. This was always going to happen.
Right.
And I think Helena has a line, it's like, you were asking for help, basically, at
Right.
this invasion of Syracuse.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I mean,
Which is a really cool idea. I really liked the idea that, like, okay, this was just a buoy thrown out into history by Archimedes at this point, being like, I know this thing is going to happen here, and I spent my life afterwards trying to make it so it can still happen. I don't know. His plan specifically, Archimedes, doesn't make a ton of sense after the events of this film, because assuming, I guess, unless this movie takes place in an alternate reality in which, I guess it does, where Syracuse doesn't fall and Archimedes leaves, and like Sicily isn't conquered by the Romans during this time, which I guess is the case. Little bit of historical background. This is all taking place during the Second Carthaginian War between Carthage and Rome, and at some point Sicily switches sides and basically aligns itself with Carthage, which is why the Romans are invading.
Right.
And historically, the Romans sweep back in, burn everything down, kill Archimedes, take over Syracuse, and the Second Punic War doesn't end well for Carthage.
Right. Sure.
Meanwhile, somewhere Hannibal is invading the Alps with a bunch of elephants, but we don't worry about that in this film.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, because once again, it's. I think you're right. I think it's just I didn't think about it to a certain extent because, of course, it's all just about Indiana Jones' story.
Sure. And like in the moment in the film, I'm not necessarily thinking about that.
Right.
I don't want to say that is like a huge negative in the film. After the fact, I sat down and was like, does the time travel make sense in this movie? Yes, it's the villain's plan that doesn't actually make any sense.
Right. Yeah, I don't. I agree. I'd have to go back. I mean, now I'm going to want to go back and watch it again, looking for that. Like, does he ever explain for any reason why he thinks that? I don't think he does, but I've only seen it once. So, but yeah,
they have some dropped lines about like how the dials control like where the destinations that you're looking for are, but why they think that's the case, I don't know.
Right. And also the whole thing is just he's just wrong because Archimedes had done this anyway. Right. Like, I mean, that's
right.
The whole thing is just it didn't matter. He never had a chance.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So like in hindsight, the villain's plan in this movie like starts to fall apart a little bit in my brain. Which is fine because he's a Nazi and he's stupid and he should die, and he does, and it's great.
Yeah. Does he ever? Like I said, he gets.
I really wished he'd gotten beheaded by a Roman, but that's just me.
That would have been, like I said, I think total decimation is always important to an Indiana Jones villain. There needs to be
a term that the Romans coined.
Oh, there you go. But I just
do you know what that used to mean, John?
I don't.
When a squad of Roman soldiers did badly in a battle, they would be decimated after that, and they would draw lots, and a tenth of their unit would be ceremoniously killed by their fellows after the battle. That is what decimation comes from.
Good Lord, yeah.
Yeah, the Romans not great either.
No. I saw Gladiator, and soon we'll get. Because there's another trailer we saw recently. Soon we're going to get Ridley Scott's Napoleon.
I'm very curious about that film because Napoleon's such a bad dude in this movie. I don't know if it's making him out to be a hero or what. We'll see.
Oh, I don't. I mean, yeah. I think probably ambiguous at best, right? But yeah, I'm just in it for more Ridley Scott battle scenes.
Sure.
So they, so we get this final moment though where Indiana Jones wants to stay in the past. And that's sort of the crux of the theme of the movie, right?
Right. Well, it's Indiana Jones kind of like embracing the mythological end of the man trapped in the past becomes trapped in the past.
Yeah. And becoming convinced almost like a villain, right? Almost like one of his villains that, oh, this is the destiny I have, right? Like, this is where I belong. I was supposed to come here. This is my play. And it's Helena who's kind of like, dude, that's shitty to everyone who cares about you now.
Yeah, and Indy being convinced that there is nobody that cares about him and being wrong is the summation of this film, right?
Right. And I mean, and that's such a realistic thing for such a heightened world of these movies, right? Is this idea that Indiana Jones is so locked into his own depression, that he's like, nobody cares about me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm such a bummer, you know.
Well, and it is a reflection of the franchise as a whole, right? It's this idea of like,
and apparently that's also
nobody
where
cares about
the
Indiana
show
Jones. Let's just leave it in the past. And this idea of, no, there are people who still care about Indiana Jones. It might not be the whole world anymore, but there are still people in the present day that care.
Yeah. And it is the reconstruction then of a family of sorts at the end of the movie.
Yeah.
When we get Marion back, which of course, when there was initial talk that she wasn't going to be in it, it is sort of like, no, that can't happen. You can't do that. Like, I think everybody's fear was we were just going to start the movie and she's dead. I think that was everybody's, like, it's just like,
yeah.
And he's just widowed, and, you know, another woman is dead in a franchise, and instead it's Mutt who's gone, and they're forced to come back together in a great moment that they talked about was an early, like, oh, we got to do this, is the recreation of their scene from Raiders, which is really nicely done, and it turns into this, like, beautiful reconnection between them. And I like that the movie doesn't end with, like, and they're fine now. It ends with, like, they're maybe taking the first steps towards being okay, and on some level. They'll never be okay, obviously, having lost their son, but, like, they're at least coming together for the first time since, and actually talking about their feelings. And Sala's there because he should be. I love Sala's whole family now in the U.S. Oh, it's great. I saw somebody talking about it. They go like, how is this a better life for Sala? He had a kingdom over there. And I'm just like, well, it probably got fucking wrecked during World War II is what I'm assuming is why he left Egypt.
People don't know about what happened in World War II outside of Europe.
Exactly. It's like, I have to imagine he had to, like, get out of Egypt fast, is my guess. And Indy got him in the U.S.
I would encourage people to look up the North Africa campaign and how bad things got when the Nazis invaded.
Highly recommend. I don't know. Have you watched the show, Greg? Have you seen Rogue Heroes, the show about the birth of the SAS? So good, but it has it's all African battleground conflict, which you almost never see in World War II stuff, because that's where the SAS was born. They were going behind enemy lines, going, why are we fighting planes in the air when we can just blow up their airfields? Yeah, really good show, really awesome show. If you're into World War II at all, but so I do love all that stuff, and yeah, just this sort of like, and then of course the last moment of the hat on the clothesline. Wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, that was how the movie had to end, right? Is him grabbing the hat.
Like, and I also like that was the thing too, because people go like, "Wow, this is the last Indiana Jones movie. She's gonna die, right?" It's like, well, number one, that's not the end of a story necessarily. That's not the only way a story has to end for a character.
I don't know if anyone's ever heard this old yarn of "and he lived happily ever after."
And that's kind of what the thing is. That's what I like about the realism of this is like, and he's gonna try to live happily ever after at the very least.
Yeah.
And that's the message. Is like, try to find something, and he's found a surrogate daughter in Helena, and he does have friends like Sala, and he does love Marion, and there's something there. It's great. I just think, like I said, that's how I would want Indiana Jones' story to end. I never felt during the movie he was going to die, because it was just sort of a thing where you just go like, thematically that wouldn't make any sense. That's not the story that's being told here.
Once we got back into the past, I kind of saw it going in two directions. One is he comes back and we have like a ride off into the sunset moment, like we kind of do in this film. The other is he has his ride off into the sunset moment, but the sunset is 200 BC, where he rides off into the sunset, and we cut to the future, and Helena finds some record of Indiana Jones living in the past.
You could, I mean, and that was something that could have been done, and I did hear rumors about the idea of this, like, oh, he's got to go back. I did hear a pitch where somebody goes, no, he goes back to World War II, and then he just relives the movies again, or something like that. He goes back to, it's just like, that's no, because the whole point is you can't live in the past. It's the movie is much smart. I'll just say this, as is often the case. The actual movie is much smarter and more clever than most of the fan pitches I heard for ways this could end. It's a reason why. Being a fan, quote unquote, and whatever that means, doesn't mean you should be writing things like the things that you're a fan of. Because you don't necessarily just because you love something doesn't mean you're like intrinsically knowing what's right for the franchise. I know a lot of people feel they do.
Yeah, look, I spent enough time with Star Wars YouTube to
I
tell you
literally
some stuff.
just saw somebody pitching, you know what Star Wars needs to do? They need to forget the brain trust of writers. They need to get all the top Star Wars YouTubers in a room and have them figure out. And I was just like, that would be the single worst thing. And also, I would be like, they would never be able to agree on anything, I don't think. There'd be so much infighting about lore and stuff that you just... It's the thing people got bent out of shape because Nate Moore said, who's one of the Marvel producers, said the thing about, like, sometimes when people come to us and say they want to write one of our movies and talk about what big fans they are, that can sometimes be a red flag. People go like, Marvels want to hire fans. It's like, no, I kind of get what he's saying. When it's like, well, in the comics this happened, so this has to happen.
There is a certain level of slavish devotion to properties that can be detrimental to telling good stories, because all you have is, like I said earlier, the platonic ideal of what you think the story is, and it's really hard to express what emotions you're feeling through character dialogue, and that is a skill. And that is not a skill that everyone has. I'm not even claiming to have it.
Right.
Being able to express the continuation of a story and being able to tell a good story that isn't just a static recreation of what you think the best bits of a thing are is really hard.
It's incredibly hard. And that's the thing I think I said. That's why I love Mangold talking about that. You have to put aside the iconography. Of course, you can't forget it, and you need to embrace him when you can, but you have to go, who is this guy? What is the story I want to tell about this human being named Indiana Jones? Mm-hmm. And I think that's the key to where so many of these have gone right or wrong.
And, I mean, we referenced The Last Jedi earlier in terms of, like, the quintessential divisive moment in Star Wars fandom, and it is that to a certain extent because Rian Johnson made a decision that he was trying to tell a specific story about Luke Skywalker, and that story isn't what people have had in their heads because of novels and comic books for 20 plus years, and because it wasn't that, there is a vitriolic reaction.
If your issues with Last Jedi involve saying the name Mara Jade, I don't really want to have a conversation with you about it, because it's just that's not not that you can't be disappointed that they never included Mara Jade, but it's just like that's neither here nor there for the quality of that movie, because a thing you like and a thing that doesn't exist within that continuity isn't there. That's not Rian Johnson's fault. And also, I'm the biggest defender of Last Jedi. I think there's an objective argument that it's the best Star Wars movie. Put it out there.
I think it's the best of the sequels. Yeah.
Oh, it's definitely the best of the sequels. But, like, it's in the running. I just think that's such an amazing movie that, unfortunately, I can't enjoy because the next movie completely decimated.
Sure, it retroactively makes that whole trilogy worse.
So it's a bummer. But I do think...
when you have something like Indiana Jones, though, that has less of a, like, broad spanning web of... stuff to pull from.
Yeah,
it can have a more definitive, specific ending to it.
It's also more inherently episodic, right? It is sort of the adventures of Indiana Jones. It's contingent on this movie to actually kind of grab the whole thing in a net, right? Like sort of thing where it's like, all right, let's sum up what these movies... It's very much what Chris McQuarrie's doing on the Mission Impossible movies. Now that... Because for the longest time, Mission Impossible was a different director every movie, and so it's sort of like each person's take on it. Now that they have a singular filmmaker, he's actually going back to all the original movies and going, all right, if I'm looking at this as the story of a man's life, what are the threads I'm pulling on? And I think this particularly, Dead Reckoning, when people are when you go out and see it, and you should see it because it's amazing. Everybody go see it. It is the most in depth about who is Ethan Hunt, what does he want, where did he come from. It really digs into like what is this guy, what drives him, and I think it's exceptionally good. But I think that is certainly something we think about more now in filmmaking in general. So when we go back to these franchises, yeah, they're kind of asking more than it used to be. Look at the James Bond franchise, right? It used to just be James Bond showed up, he was awesome, he kicked a bunch of ass, and then he left and got on the next movie. It's not until the Daniel Craig movies they start going like, hey, what's this guy's deal? And like, how does he feel about stuff? I think we just want more out of characters now.
There's also something to be said for having that platonic singular adventure, though, and especially where James Bond is concerned, that franchise, like you said, not necessarily didn't want, but like wasn't bothered with grappling with those questions. And is it the modern audience that necessarily, quote unquote, wants that? Or is it something that modern writers feel more compelled to do because it is a more traditional, at this point, way of telling stories across multiple serialized films?
I think what people want, the sense I get is it's a bit of column A, column B, right? Because I think something I absolutely adore is Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, which is doing very classic single adventures of Star Trek, but the accumulation of them matters to the characters. You actually feel the characters are changing along with each adventure, even if it's a singular individual adventure. I think that's the sense. Things are less disposable than they used to be. So it's sort of like people want to be rewarded for following things going forward. It's very hard to make something, and people are very quick to go, hey, why isn't that mattering that they did that thing last week?
I think that's a very good point. I think the idea that things are less disposable is exactly, you're hitting the nail on the head. And Strange New Worlds, I think, is one of the best examples of the idea of, like, everything matters, but we can still have a single adventure in which Spock and T'Pring swap bodies for an episode and have a good time.
Absolutely.
Man, last week's episode of Strange New Worlds, I don't want to get too off track, but holy shit, that episode was good.
Where we've forgotten on the planet.
Yeah, it was just like a good, like, one-off, totally like singular adventure, but it was such a classic Star Trek. Just like,
it was
let's
such
solve
a classic
problem on a world.
Solve a problem on a world, but also in that modern sense, it was a really good story for Pike and Ortega's. And, you know, I mean, like, that's the thing, is like, I actually felt like characters. And so I think that show is showing what I love, where it's like, yes, I love that episode and that episode's story, but they're also doing the next step is like, and how does that adventure affect Christopher Pike as a person? And it's possible to do both.
Right.
So
I mean, perfect example is the episode the prior week with the time travel stuff with La'an and Kirk was just so good.
Oh man, Christina Chong as La'an is absolutely amazing on that. I mean, that whole cast is just incredible. If you're not watching Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, I get it. People don't want to get Paramount Plus. I can't really make a good argument for having it, other than I
Star
have
Trek.
to. Yeah, Star Trek is kind of the reason I have to have it. They're going to keep me on that as long as it exists, because it's now the only place to watch any of the shows, thanks to them taking it off of everywhere else. So, but yeah, that show's amazing. So, one thing I want to touch on briefly, and we don't want to talk about it too much, but we did talk about this movie's box office performance is a fascinating thing, because I keep seeing people yelling about, oh man, what a disaster, what a huge flop. And I think we're constantly talking about the film business on this show, and it starts to get into this whole idea of like, what the hell is a flop? I don't know what a flop is anymore. I really don't. It's because this movie made by so many other things like a good amount of money, except it didn't when you compare it to what it cost and what others made. It's a weird thing.
We live in a strange age of metrics, right? Where the metric for what constitutes a successful film has changed so radically in the last 10 years that it's really hard to determine what a success and a failure even mean anymore, outside of some very basic comparative maths that I guess is all you really have to go on most of the time. But at the same time, you have these huge mega franchises owned by Disney and other large corporations. Though, what other large corporation is there at this point? That they can pump. What did this movie cost? $250 million?
Yeah, they're about.
And obviously, like, that doesn't account for marketing, and those numbers are always deflated a little bit depending on how they spend their money.
It's probably 400 all in.
Yeah. And so if it doesn't make $1 billion, it's a failure as a film, right?
That's
according to some people.
Right. Yes. By the if you're going like pure money, it cost this, it made this, it's.
But if it breaks even, it's still seen as a failure.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
If it only like doubles its budget, it's still a failure.
Correct.
If it isn't Avengers Endgame, it's a failure.
Right.
You can have a film be the third highest grossing film of the year and still be considered, quote unquote, a failure by
this movie opened
certain people's metrics.
There's a really good AV Club article about like how is this movie a flop, and one of the things was it opened $50 million more than the movie in the second slot. It made $60 million domestic opening weekend, and the next movie, number 2, which I think might have been Spider-Verse, I can't remember, made 10. So they're just talking about like, so that means of all the people going to the movies that weekend, the vast majority saw Indiana Jones, and it leads me to this whole thing where it's like, clearly, there's something about going to the movies, right? There's clearly something about the business of theaters. We're not talking about movies anymore. Very similar thing happened with The Flash, too. This movie's making almost the exact same amount of money as The Flash. Another movie that's a horrendous bomb, even though it dominated when it came out, right? But
and when we say horrendous bomb, we're saying that in air quotes in terms of like how people are reporting it, I think.
That's exactly it. That's exactly the thing about it. Because all the headlines I see about like box office bomb, I mean, literally there's an article that just came out today calling it "The Flash is the worst box office flop in superhero history." And you're like, is that true? That can't.
Maybe it is, but like, traditionally when we say a flop or a bomb, what we're talking about is a movie that can't even make its budget back in terms of its gross, either domestically or internationally.
Yeah.
And the biggest tentpole example of that I can think of off the top of my head, even though it hurts me to say it, is John Carter, right? A movie that cost about the same as this film and never made its budget back.
Not even close. That was met with a severe indifference from movie audiences, is what I would say. Not vitriol. It's just people didn't seem to want to go.
Right. Exactly. Whereas this movie, like, how much has it made in the box office as of this recording?
As of this recording, I'm clicking on it right now. So what's that? 2 weeks of release?
Yeah,
a little under 250 million worldwide.
Okay, so let's say it has another 3 to 6 weeks of a box office run in terms of how long it's in theaters for. I think that's probably a generous estimate, is somewhere in there.
Yeah.
In that time, it has a pretty decent runway. There's not a lot of other big, like, tentpole action films that might get in its way other than
Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible. So, like, is Mission Impossible just going to completely decimate Indiana Jones? Or is the love of this franchise of Indiana Jones and the willingness of people to go out and go see this movie over, say, a Mission Impossible, will that continue it in a way that it will eventually eke its budget back out? Well, as of right now, it hasn't really made its budget back.
No, I mean, Mission Impossible is set to make opening weekend what this movie has made in 2 weeks. As of tracking, who knows? But they're looking at 250.
And tracking is like pre-sale on tickets and like people who say on surveys that they're excited to go see the movie.
Yeah, it's looking at trends. It's looking at how many seats have already been bought, how many people are talking about it, and doing a lot of if this trend continues, then this, and it can go up or down. It's a weird thing now. I mean, that is the crazy thing now, too, is also with the tracking and predictions. Like, I was already hearing Indiana Jones was a flop a month before it came out. It was already the story. Just because tracking's bad, it's over. The movie's not even out for another 3 weeks, and it's already dead in the water.
And that sort of reporting can like be a vicious cycle, right? Like
Yeah.
you get a bunch of reporting that the movie's not doing well. People hear that, assume that it's bad, and then don't go see the movie.
Well, and the other weird thing about this, of course, is they premiered this movie at the Cannes Film Festival, and there was a lot of vitriol from the critics at the Cannes Film Festival, and the movie gained almost 20% Rotten Tomatoes once just the regular critics saw it, not just the Cannes crowd. And suddenly the story about it shifted to, I heard like, oh God, what a disappointment, to all of a sudden I started to see more and more, hey, it's pretty good.
And I think that was a mistake, like releasing a movie like this at Cannes. Like, that's the wrong audience. That's like indie film, small drama and comedy stuff, and this is a big bombastic throwback. Like, why would you premiere this at Cannes?
Yeah, and it's interesting because then most like American critics, like what I always go to Rotten Tomatoes and I click on top critics because that does as much as possible to filter out just the noise, because these are people who actually have to be like in recognized publications, implying they are professional critics that people have hired to talk about movies.
Sure.
And most of those people have pretty nice things to say about it, to at least even like, there's not a lot. I mean, there's, you've got a couple guys always, but like generally there seems to be a favorable, and also the, like, I mean, take what you will. I always take with a massive grain of salt the audience score, because we know how that can be affected. But, 88% audience score for a movie like this, that's pretty good for that. And it's also got I think an A- cinema score, which is just from the tabulation like surveys that when you come out of the theater opening weekend, which once again, it's always hard. It's always trying to put metrics to, do people enjoy a movie, which is always a tough thing.
So
but
subjective,
it's all we have.
And so
it's all we have. But it's sort of like, it's just sort of meant to be like, are most people going kind of. So generally, and most people I talk to seem to basically like it. I haven't actually talked to anyone in person who was just like, nah, terrible.
Yeah, no, me neither. And like, I've had some conversations with some of our mutuals and people online, and like you say, like a lot of the early buzz was just like, oh, why would they keep doing this? And then once actual, like, I'm not going to say mainstream critics, but critics that I go to, critics that like I follow on YouTube or read their stuff on like IGN or
the people,
Polygon or
once
whatever.
again, I look at that as the professional critics who are going to every movie that comes out every weekend, who are versed in what is coming out in film, is kind of the thing.
And there's no one voice I trust to as the authority on movies, because that's
Certainly
not how
not.
opinions work.
No, certainly not. But like, I'll shout him out because I think he's one of the few really good critics. Is David Sims, who's on the aforementioned Blank Check podcast, and he writes for The Atlantic. I disagree with some of his opinions about stuff, but he really liked this movie, and generally he's a guy who I respect his opinion, even if I disagree with. And I thought he had a really good write-up about this movie.
Right. Whereas, like, you get some opinions on, like, IGN, the review for this movie right now gives it a 4 out of 10. And that's Siddhant Adlaka. But he's comparing it to, like, trying to is this an attempt to try to recapture Spielberg's magic?
And I think that's like I said, that's kind of where I start to, the critics that are saying that usually don't like it. And it's like, and Mangold even said this. Mangold said, I'm running for third best. He goes, my dream is to be the third best. And I think, in my opinion, he succeeded in that. That's exactly where I rank this. But I also, once again, don't have the love of Temple of Doom that other people have. But I put this right after Last Crusade and Raiders. I really think, at the very least, I think he succeeded in what he's trying to do, which is this stands with them. This does not feel like, oh man, what was that one?
No, I think that's more my reaction to Crystal Skull than this movie any day of the week.
And I think that would be, there's a conversation to be had about that. I still think Crystal Skull is not nearly as bad as people say it is, but I do think that one, I think it's interesting. I think of this now as the opposite of the Star Trek franchise, and the odd ones are the good ones. Because I think both Temple of Doom and Crystal Skull are the two where some real cracks show in, like, just in terms of, like, they don't quite know what they're doing. Spielberg and Lucas aren't on the same page. Temple of Doom was really hurt by the fact that Harrison Ford badly injured his back, so he's not in the movie a lot. Like, most of the fight scenes in that movie are a stunt double. So there's a lot of things that went into it. And Spielberg even has kind of, I don't know that he's disowned Temple of Doom, but he's like, boy, that one got away from me.
Mistakes were made.
Yeah, and it's like both he and Lucas were getting divorced, and they talk about like, so all of a sudden things got way dark. But to each their own. I know there are people who love that movie.
All of this is to say is that like reviews are people's opinions.
Yes.
Any review is being written by a person, and a person reacts to art in different ways because art is subjective, right? So
yes,
all of the Gestalt ratings that we come up with are an attempt to aggregate all of those random opinions into something that a broad audience can look at casually and go like, okay, the vast majority thumbs up or the vast majority thumbs down. And that has now like steered the course of media discussion to the point where you can have something be a 65% on Rotten Tomatoes and suddenly 65% is a D, which means it's bad, right? Even if that is like the majority of people saying, yeah, it's good.
I have to say, and I've brought this up before, I really have a problem, not with Rotten Tomatoes as a site, but the like worshiping of those numbers, or the import people put on those numbers is, yes, it's a percent. People do talk about that movie's better than a 65%. It's like, no, that's not it's just aggregating. That just means 65% of reviews say it's positive. But the problem I have with that then is, what's a positive review? Because sometimes I read a review that's listed as rotten, and I go, well, they seem to say it was okay still. And sometimes I read a review that's listed as fresh and go, this guy seems to hate the movie. Like, it's really bizarre, because once again, you're trying to put an aggregate now to an opinion of good or bad. And I'm in the opinion of shout out to fellow YouTuber Patrick H. Willems, who I love. He did a great video called "In Celebration of Okay Movies," because he goes, most movies are just fine. Like most of the time when I see a movie, I go, it's all right.
That's honestly where I land on this movie. Is like, I thought it was good. Is it a masterpiece? No, I don't think so. I think it's got issues. I think like I've discussed my nitpicks with it.
Well, it's not Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, but I mean, not what can be.
Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 2. That's the movie that can be.
Well, I will say, I did come out of it going, I can't say it's the best one, because it is technically only half a story. Though I will say, of the first part, like cliffhangers, it is the most complete movie I've seen this summer. There is an ending. It's closer to an Empire Strikes Back cliffhanger than it is to Fast X or Spider-Verse. It really does feel like this part of the story is over, but the ongoing thing is continuing. Whereas Fast X is literally join us next time to be continued. Like the movie just stops.
And same with Spider-Verse.
Right. Those are both like, this one is like, we've won this battle, but the war continues kind of ending. Although it is the first one I've seen actually put up at the end of the movie, end part 1.
But all of this is to say that like all of these aggregate scores and the ways we view media criticism contribute to this tendency, especially in the post-pandemic era, where people will casually see a 63% on Rotten Tomatoes and say, I don't need to go out into the theaters to see that.
Well, and I think that's a big thing too when we're seeing, because there's a whole thing about, there's been a run of these movies. We talked about Dungeons and Dragons, which financially did not do very well. Neither has The Flash or this or a bunch of like big tentpole movies, and people are going, what's happening? What is going on? And the answer is, I think there's too many big movies coming out end to end to end. I think that's a big problem. Like every weekend there's some new
Certainly
big
doesn't
thing.
Help. Yeah.
And two, because of the pandemic, people are like, we'll skip this one. We won't go to Indiana Jones because we're going to go to Mission Impossible. I think there are people going, I only am going to put myself out there in the theater a couple times a month or once a month, and so I'm going to go to this one, not that one. And so that's just going to lead to that. It's like there's nothing wrong with movies. People act like movies are broken. I've read these think pieces about people don't like movies anymore. It's like, no, I just think people don't want to go to the theater. I think that's another thing, too, that will be like, so many people will watch this movie when it's on Disney+. And is that a metric of success? Yeah. It's one of the interesting things somebody talked about is, since this movie has come out, the viewing numbers for the original 4 movies on Disney+ have skyrocketed, implying that this movie has, at the very least, reintroduced interest in the character. And who knows what merch sales are too? I mean, certainly I alone am giving Disney a lot of money, but it's an interesting. Like I said, what a success of a movie is goes beyond what its box office is now. Movies have such long lives.
6 years ago, half the streaming services we use today didn't exist.
That is crazy to think about, right?
Right? Like, Disney Plus did not exist.
No.
HBO Max did not really exist.
No.
Wait, Netflix.
Gergoni, what was the first part of that? I only know of a service called Max.
Oh, yeah, sure. Sorry.
Yeah.
The idea that all of those streaming services are now a place where that is where the movies, the big tentpole movies, the Marvels, the Lucasfilms, they're all going to end up on there anyway. We know that. All of these movies are just going to come to our house. 6 years ago, that wasn't the case.
I mean,
there was no guarantee that a Disney movie was going to end up on a streaming service anywhere.
No, I just saw the thing about the Peacock announced, at the beginning of first week in August, the Super Mario Brothers movie will be on Peacock, and the new Transformers movie is going to be on Paramount, like they're all just going to go right to it. So I do have sort of that feeling too, where it's like, if I am somebody who loves going to the movies, even though I hate people, but I love going to movies in the theater. This is my big thing. I just wish other people wanted to go and like movies. I don't know what is wrong with people.
We need an Alamo Draft House.
Please, Alamo Draft House. There's one in Seattle. I do want to go to that at some point. Oh. Brendan and I actually talked about going up there because they were premiering the new Subspecies movie, which we cover on Meet the Monsters. And Brendan and I seriously went like, should we take a road trip up there and see that new piece of shit? They're terrible movies, and we actively hate them.
But
we
at
still
that
thought
theater,
about going to the theater to see
everyone would be there to see the premiere and nothing else.
Right. Yeah. The thing about it, but what I was going to say is this movie. Oh, just a small anecdote from this movie. Literally, sit down in this movie. I'm in. I go to Cinemark because they have the really nice seats that recline. Oh, so great. But okay, that's great. But people get a little too comfortable at that. Guy next to me kicks off his fucking shoes, barefoot and I'm just like, dude, come on, like, let's have some decorum here.
I don't want to smell your fucking feet when I'm out at the theater.
Yeah, and of course, then you also had the family with the gaggle of children, most under 10. I'm not saying this movie's like inappropriate, but it is also long. And at a certain point, because they've got the reclining seats, now I got a kid to the right of me going, just moving the thing up and down because they're bored because he's talking about maps. I mean, it is sort of that thing where I'm just like, for the love of, just can we all? That was the nice thing actually about going to the Dead Reckoning, aside from just like jam packing people in there, and so you got so and so needs to move down the aisle with their massive amount of snacks. Everybody was there because they love the Mission Impossible movies. So I do often like going to those. That's why I like going to the Marvel screenings and stuff like that. For the most part, here I just saw this. I saw this on 4th of July actually.
That's why I really like those Fathom event rescreenings of films. Like all the Ghibli films are in theaters right now with the Fathom events. They've been doing a lot of Godzilla movies in the recent past that I've been enjoying the hell out of because everyone shows up to those knowing exactly what they want to do, and that's see the movie.
Yes, they're there specifically for the experience of this, not just let's go to a movie. You had to kind of seek out where they were showing Mission Impossible early and stuff like that. And so it's like those are often more fun, and people also know the franchise, so they're applauding at stuff and laughing at stuff. Although still, there were a couple things. Once again, you heard 3 people laugh at that. There were a couple times at the Dead Reckoning screening where it was literally just me going, oh. And I just wanted to stand and go, it was in the first movie! All right. Nobody applauded for the return of IMF director Eugene Kitteridge, who hasn't been in the movie since the fucking Henry Czerny's back. Like, woo, Kitteridge! Anyway, yeah. So, all that to say is, as always, just make up your own minds. that the point of that is I don't like the narratives of these movies being written before most people have even seen them, and that was so much the case of this. Critics at Cannes, a lot of them didn't like it. Tracking looked bad, so this movie was a failure well before it even came out in theaters, and that's just stupid. I don't care what the movie is. That's dumb. Just go see movies, and if you like them, it's if you like what you like. There are some movies I basically use critics. If I don't know, if I'm like, I don't know about this movie, what are critics saying? But generally, if I want to see a movie, I just go see the movie, and I actually try to avoid the reviews of them now. A lot of the time, I
usually do the same, like before bigger films come out. I'll be like, let's not for this one.
Yeah. Because like I said, because the other thing is I don't like, and that was the problem with this movie. They were unavoidable because it was everything. So that makes me sit there and go, even if I'm enjoying it, I have to sit there and start going, what do people not like about this?
Yeah.
What are people? Yeah. I don't want that in my head. I don't want other people's murmuring about the movie in my head. So, totally. Yeah. Well, those are our thoughts on Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny and a bunch of other stuff.
Among other things.
Yeah. And who knows? There won't be a movie industry tomorrow. So, next month on Panel Up, I think we've gone back and forth about, but I think we're going to do a review of two movies. I think this makes the most sense to do this. We're going to do the Barbenheimer review.
My favorite mashup since Animal Crossing and Doom, Barbenheimer.
Barbenheimer. It is all the rage, and I think it's well worth talking about. What I think is actually seemingly at the moment seems to be a really good thing talking about the box office, because people are kind of getting into the cultural zeitgeist moment of, I'm going to see both of these movies opening weekend.
For those who don't know what we're talking about, because they're not as terminally online as us,
people
are talking about Barbie and Oppenheimer,
which are coming out the same day, which I believe is July 20th. I think is the day that they come out. And so they're going to go. And literally, I saw Tom Cruise promoting this movie, going, "Oh shit, yeah, I'm going to Oppenheimer on Friday. I'm going to Barbie on Saturday." Because one of the things that's really fun is, and one of the things I really love about Tom Cruise, amongst many, many things I love about the man, is his commitment to getting people back in the theaters. So he's going, I'm going to go to this, you should go to this. And then you've got Greta Gerwig, who directed Barbie, going, well, I'm going to go to Oppenheimer, and I'm going to go to Mission Impossible. And so you have all these filmmakers who are just loving the industry and the art form. It's not about fighting each other. It is just like, we just want to get people in seats this summer and help save this industry. Because Tom Cruise will save movie theaters.
I think we'll do this off mic, but we have to decide. One of us has to go see Oppenheimer, then Barbie, and the other one has to see Barbie, then Oppenheimer.
Okay.
Just to compare notes about the experience.
Which way works better. Because, I mean, the fun thing about it is they're two completely different films. Like, they couldn't be further apart. Oppenheimer, I have heard the screenings they've done of it, people have left, quote, devastated.
Oh, God.
It is 3 hours long. It is, but also the craziest thing, I was just watching a featurette about, there is no CGI in the movie at all.
Because Nolan is a fucking maniac and wanted to make the world's largest explosion without actually getting a nuclear bomb.
He basically took it right to the edge of an actual nuke and made the Trinity bomb test happen live in camera. It is insane what that guy has done. And so that is like, I just think it's so crazy to me to think that a 3-hour Oppenheimer movie is a summer blockbuster. But I'm jazzed because I love Chris Nolan, and I can't wait to see what he's done with this. I am going to go see it in 70 millimeter as Nolan wants, because that'll also be something we can compare.
Sure. I'll probably end up just seeing it in IMAX.
No, that's also good too. I mean, his big thing is to, luckily there is one theater here in Portland and is showing it in 70 millimeters. So I'm going to go to that. But yeah, should be very curious. We'll compare and contrast. I'm excited for Barbie, though. Barbie looks incredibly interesting. I'm a little worried about what that's going to lead to, because I don't know if you saw the news about the A24 or the attempt to do an A24 type movie with Barney now that Mattel is doing.
Oh, no. Yeah, there's going to be a whole reaction to these sorts of films that is just going to lead to a lot of crap.
Introspective dramas based on childhood toys, and I'm like, yeah, I don't know if I need that in my life. But whatever.
I mean,
gonna try
so long as the end point on this is a serious, dramatic, sociological, introspective film about Wishbone and his retelling of stories to kill children. That's where this needs to end.
How did that dog read all those books?
What is the story, Wishbone?
So that'll be next month on the show. But, of course, next week we'll be back to the 1970s. I think, is it this week that we're kicking off the first of the arc, of the next big arc of it?
We're entering the wheel.
Yes. So we're entering a big new era for Star Wars as they tread water.
Let's not oversell it.
I was just gonna say, as they tread water before Empire Strikes Back comes out. Yeah. So make sure you continue to follow us there, like and subscribe on your podcatching software. Make sure you like and comment below and hit that bell for notifications if you're watching on YouTube.
If you saw Dial of Destiny, let us know down in the comments below.
Yeah,
what do you
please
think?
do. And of course, you can get more content from us and the entire Punch Up Entertainment Network at our Podbean patron page. That's patron.podbean.com/punchup. So head over there. For just a few bucks, you can get all kinds of cool bonus material. And help us out, too.
Hey, it never hurts. Person. If you want to help fund John's road trip to go see the Subspecies film up in Seattle, help us over there.
That was a thing where we said, let's not say anything on the show, because people will, if I ever say, like, hey, should we do a dumb thing? People will always say yes. So it's like, let's not put that out to our listeners, because they will be like, do it! But that is going to do it for this month's episode of Panel Up. I've been John Campbell.
And I will always be Mike Gargoni.
Till next month, we're going to panel down.